Good evening, curious minds out there across the world, and welcome back to the Clandestine Radio Podcast. This is File001B, my conversation with the one and only Ed Casas, which will go into detail a little bit more about who he is and why his opinion carries so much weight. This is a discussion about the Nazca Tridactyls that we brought up during the File001 Aliens episode. We're having to push BTR off until next week, unfortunately, but I wanted to go ahead and get this one out to you. There's also an extended version on the Patreon if anyone is interested. And fear not, if you want to watch the extended cuts of any of this stuff, it will move to the free tier at the end of the season. Thank you guys so much for tuning in again, and I hope you enjoy.
Welcome to Clandestine Radio Podcast, Season 4.
I don't know, I guess I just had the ambition to talk to people this year, bring back the interview format. I also still try to do several deep dives and cover some topics that I've really been wanting to get to and never had a chance to. And I guess just hope that everybody's willing to come along for the ride. Ed, how are you doing today, sir?
Good. Very good. Thanks for having me on your show. I appreciate any opportunity to talk about this.
Absolutely, man. Happy to have you. If you don't mind, I kind of wanted to go into your history a little bit. I know that you began as an archaeologist, which is really interesting. And if you could just kind of walk us through the progression that got you to where you are today.
Yeah, well, I come from the hospitality industry, to be honest. Most of my life, I worked as either a waiter or a bartender or a bouncer. And I remember one day I was reading Carl Sagan's, I think it's called The Demon Haunted World, his book. And I remember just literally closing it and saying, I'm going to major in anthropology. And one of the reasons I wanted to do that was I had no intentions of doing archaeology. I just thought it was a good degree in something that I was interested in that I could segue into teaching history and social studies for children. That was the main idea there. And I'm also a sometimes professional actor here in South Florida. And I could have gone into the theater program. And I just saw that as not being just not having a viable just background, especially again, since I was already acting. And so I was like, let me do this. This is what I'm interested in. We talk about, sort of an origin story, but there's a lot that even led up to that. Just as a kid reading the encyclopedia and reading about the different gods and deities, to my aunt taking me to Native American museums, and then even her aunts giving me the Time Life books, where I saw early man, and it made me say, oh, so there were beings that looked like Bigfoot that were around. So everyone's, my mother's like, oh, Bigfoot, that's fake, which, is fine for people to say that. But once you see images of Australopithecines and Paranthropus, you start to say, well, hold on a second. Perhaps society doesn't tell us everything that we need to know. So, I went to Florida Atlantic University in Boca Raton, where I ended up becoming the president of the honors club called Lambda Alpha, the honors club for anthropology students. And I decided it would be a good time to volunteer. And I always recommend people to volunteer for things. Again, my parents, always the skeptics, are like, you're going to do that for free? They just didn't have the foresight that I did. And so I volunteered at the Natural History Museum and started as a tour guide. But eventually that grew to activities coordinator and running their education department. Again, little did I know that this opportunity here was going to lead me to actual hands-on in the field archaeology. And so not only did I do that with the museum themselves when they created their own division of this, but also with the Miami-Dade archaeologist, Gary Biter, rest in peace. He was my mentor. He took me with a Russian geologist, and we did a walking survey of the famed Miami Circle, this large limestone circle in the bay of Miami. Look that up. Anybody who's watching, it is definitely an interesting little site. Fortunately, I took someone there and they ended up burying it with grass, so you can't even see the darn thing, which is just, it's limestone. It should be okay to have exposed. So I don't know why they did that. And then, the actual hands-on work ends up being with a company called Janus, who is doing research for the Army Corps of Engineers. The Army Corps of Engineers was starting to reflow Lake Okeechobee into the Everglades, ceasing the dams and whatnot that they had built in the past to stop water from flowing. So being an environmentally conscious time period, they were redirecting that water, and we went in to make sure that we weren't going to bury any sites there. So what people don't realize is archaeology is a lot of hard work. It doesn't matter if you have a doctorate or if you have no degree. Everybody digs and everybody sifts in shifts. So it's hard work. And I definitely preferred doing the educational work in the museum.
I understand that. With that archaeology background, I know, I mean, we've covered quite a bit here on the show as far as like lost history and suppressed history, civilizations that predate what we have on record, deluge, impact. There's so many things that you see out there in these places, but it does kind of seem like there's a concerted effort to stick to and adhere to that mainstream historical narrative. They don't like adjusting the timeline. They don't like going back and saying, hey, maybe we got this wrong. Do you think that that is just a systemic thing with the profession itself, or do you think there's other forces at play that kind of make things have to go that way?
I think it's mostly systemic. I look at it too. If you've noticed, there's different just mindsets in the world that you may just encounter on a daily basis. And it's almost that left-right brain sort of thing happening. So there are definitely people that need concrete evidence. And then there are other people, I say like myself, who can rely on inference, instinct, and artistic creativity to help us understand the world. If you're familiar with the Myers-Briggs personality test, that definitely alludes to what I'm speaking of. So I think, it's best to definitely go with science and the numbers and the evidence, but there's times I think where we have to start to be allowed to think beyond what is the established narrative. And we know that science and even our reference on history evolves and changes. And I think we're at one of those stages where we need to evolve and change based on new data.
Yeah, absolutely. I've often wondered what the root of that is. If they just don't want to change all the textbooks, or if it's something that they are deliberately trying to keep away from humanity for one reason or another. You see a lot of that stuff when you're dealing into the alien UFO UAP things, where things are classified, and I mean the stated reason is they don't want to cause panic. People go crazy because they found out aliens are real or whatever it is. And I often wonder if that's an element within archaeology and, I mean, academia as a general field, because you see that in a lot of areas. Is that resistance to change or coming out with anything that goes against what has long been the mainstream narrative?
Yeah, I mean, even using AI, the AI will say there is no connection between different data sets. And I'll have to break it down for the AI and say, but yes, there's clearly a connection here. And I know I call it, sort of Occam's spork, which instead of Occam's razor, it's the easiest answer, despite the evidence, is the answer.
Right. You call yourself, I know you're an independent researcher and a xenoanthropologist. Can you explain what that term means to you and which way that you're using it for people that wouldn't be familiar with it?
Sure. Admittedly, it's a bit cheeky. Someone said, oh, where do you go to school for that, huh? Which incidentally, Rutgers was teaching a class on xenoanthropology.
Interesting.
So I was like, well, I don't know what they were teaching though without some of the recent evidence. Yeah, so xeno is used many times as a xenophobe, so you're a fear of the other. Mm-hmm. But I probably could just call this anthropology, but again, it's a bit cheeky on my part and a bit to gain interest, and it's essentially the cultural and physical study, just like we would with humans, but of non-humans. And of course, there are people out there calling themselves ufologists and cryptozoologists, of course. I think I'm well within my rights to do that. And it's what I've been doing for the last 3 years, is legitimately, in my opinion.
I've also heard you use the constant companion theory. I know that that's something that you kind of come to over studying these tridactyl beings and accumulation of all the evidence that you found. Can you kind of walk us through that?
Sure. So, I recall asking my professor a question back in 2002, and this alludes to just what you were just talking about, which is strange in itself to think of how many questions do you recall asking a professor from a
Right.
quarter century ago. But I asked him about petroglyphs in the Bella Coola, Canada region and those of the Taino of the Caribbean. So back in 2002, I noticed a similarity. And he gave the standard sort of academia reply, which is when I asked, is there connections between these two cultures? And he said, no. There's thousands of miles and as many years apart between these two cultures. Yet there it was before our eyes, the similarities in beings depicted in these petroglyphs. So I think that's just a great example of what we have to fight against. I hate to use it. It's almost like gaslighting. I hate to use that term, but Exhibit A
Yeah.
looks like Exhibit B. So what academia calls that is independent innovation. So a good example of that is they suggest that if a bow and arrow was invented in one continent and a bow and arrow was invented in another continent, that was independent innovation, which is really just a fancy word of saying, well, it's a coincidence. I've no longer subscribed to coincidence. In fact, I use a term that has sort of become a bad word amongst academia over the years, and that's hyperdiffusion, which I'm suggesting, which is funny too, because again, they say it's independent, but one of the big premises of anthropology is cultural diffusion. That's what we teach. Whatever we're doing in the Americas today is based on what people did in Europe before that and what Europeans learned from the Middle East, et cetera, et cetera. And so I believe now that we're actually looking at hyperdiffusion. So there is a connection between the Bella Coola and the Caribbean. We can see it in these petroglyphs. So the real trick is, okay, well, where is that connection stemming from? So I asked again, that professor, he said, no, it's a coincidence. And to this day, I no longer believe that. So if we're looking at petroglyphs from thousands of years ago and we're seeing them across the world, I'm suggesting that is hyperdiffusion. And again, if it's thousands of years ago, I'm suggesting that these beings have been with us for a very long time, hence the term constant companion theory. And we can elaborate more on just how constant that is.
I'm sure we'll get into that too. When you're talking about diffusion and all that, it kind of brought to mind things like the quote unquote cyclopean building technique with the interlocking. We see that all around
That's
the
another
world.
one. And it doesn't take an expert. And that's not even my subject. Some things I see people are very much, they've covered it quite a bit. But that's just another perfect example. Maybe that's the most drastic example of people saying that's independent innovation. Think of how complex that is and how great of these megalithic structures are in size and scope and the difficulty it is to make those. And of course, some of these interlocking designs on these stone walls and the so-called nubs. I like the term adornos, by the way, rather than nubs, adornos, like they're adornments. Those seem to be very clear evidence of cultural diffusion, hyperdiffusion, if it's crossing continents. So that is a great example. And again, I hate to use that term gaslighting, but that's almost what it feels like, is that there's academics saying no, and what is their explanation is there's no evidence of the cultures influencing one another. Well, isn't the stone walls itself the grandest form of evidence? You can see I get a little heated about some of this.
I totally understand.
It's been 3 years of fighting about these, these specimens. So,
and speaking of those specimens, I definitely want to get into that for a minute. We just did an episode on aliens, kind of as a broad topic, but there was a section where I wanted to really focus in on these samples. Before this season even started, I had on the board for last season, actually, that I wanted to cover some of the mummies that had been found down there. I've actually got it on my board back there. I don't know if you can see that, but
see the board.
There was around that time too, there wasn't a whole lot of anomaly with those particular ones found in that graveyard. And then of course there was the ones where they brought before the Mexican Congress or whatever that were clearly fraudulent. And I think that kind of really did a disservice to them in general. And it worked on me, to be honest. I thought, well, okay, well, that seems to be debunked. I'm not really going to dig much deeper into that then. But then I happened to stumble across these Tridactyls and the tridactyl.org website and was really taken back by the CT scans and the fact that they have the DICOM files available for researchers there. It seems very extensive. I don't understand how anyone could possibly fabricate those beings, particularly a lot of the anatomical structures that they have in bones and joints fitting together the way they should. There's no sign of any kind of gluing or putting together two specimens. And I think that those are really incredible. And I know that you have worked on that a lot and have a good bit of information on that. So would you mind kind of bring us up to speed on what you found through that?
Yeah, and to be fair, when I saw the Mexican hearing, I too dismissed those as fabrications, and I moved on with my day. But I think we all have our appeals to authority. That is, there's always someone we're going to look to help us explain things. I hope I can be that authority to some people. And for me at the time, it was my girlfriend who said, "Hey, did you check out those alien bodies?" Now, I'd already dismissed them, but she was my authority. And so her suggesting that I might want to take a second look, thank God she did, is when I became involved. Because those same bodies that were shown that we all dismissed were the ones that I recognized from the petroglyphs in Canada and the Caribbean. So I had a bit of a moment of enlightenment when I said, I know what those are. I've seen those before, meaning the petroglyphs.
Yeah. You're talking about the ones that kind of have the almost a square looking kind of oblong head that goes this way, thin neck and really thin features.
What
I
I
have
really
seen
like
a lot
to
of petroglyphs like that.
What I like to specify is the cordiform or heart-shaped faces of the beings. So as you mentioned, people can go to tridactyls.org, or you can go to the original site too, the-alien-project.com, and they have some real easy 3D diagrams that people can work on with their children even. They're that fun. But what I like to point out is the cordiform faces, which is a big part of my constant companion theory. It's, there's some question in this world, where does our heart shape come from? It's a very unique shape. Some people suggest it's from leaves and whatnot. But this face, this heart-shaped, cordiform-shaped face can be found globally. It can be found in not just the petroglyphs I mentioned, but in designs and images from South America, from the tiki idols of the Maori people, to the fertility idols of Syria, to the dogu of the ceramics of the Japanese Ainu, to even a European complex called the Permian bronze animal style, which depicts little heart-shaped faced beings with 3 fingers in family units. So this is when I started to realize, wait a minute, this is not just regulated to one region. This is throughout the world. In fact, another one, Easter Island, thanks to a gentleman on X who actually videotaped the cave. There is heart-shaped. I mean, these are the tridactyl beings, in my opinion. This is one of those things too, where I may sound overly confident because I am over the people saying that's a coincidence, that their use of Occam's spork, that it's just happens to be independent innovation. I am beyond that. I'm not going to be gaslit into saying, well, even though those two things look exactly alike, they're different. So here in Easter Island is clearly a tridactyl being with these shaped faces and necks that they call maki-maki, a creator being. So even in the petroglyphs of the Americas, these heart-shaped faces with tridactyl limbs are found in association with serpentine shapes, water fertility spirals, and images of a mother goddess. So when you start to piece all of these together, you have ancestor beings of the Maori, mother goddesses of the Americas, fertility beings of the Syrian eye idols, and creator beings. What is this telling you? They're associating mother goddess imagery, ancestors, fertility, and creation with these heart-shaped faces. Now, doesn't that make more sense as to why a heart shape would be important to us? And here's a model right here also of Josephina. And again, we can really get a good idea for that heart shape. And as a child, I was always like, well, you know what? Why is that a heart? Because the human heart looks nothing like that. But interestingly enough, when you turn this piece sideways, it looks a lot more like a human heart, doesn't it?
It sure does.
So that's been part of my journey, and that's why I call them the constant companions, because it seems like our ancestors didn't associate these with demons or other horrible monsters, but rather quite the contrary.
And that makes sense. And if you trace back pretty much any origin myth, you start coming across things like the Anunnaki and various creator beings that came from heaven, down to earth. You see that repeated throughout every culture pretty much. If you can trace them back far enough, you're going to wind up into some sort of myth and legend that involves that. And I think that's also a kind of a compelling element to this whole thing. A lot of people kind of think that the whole alien thing originated with like Roswell or deciding slightly before that, but it's been around for as long as human history has been around, it seems. And there's these traces that go across the entirety of the world and every civilization where you'll find these things. I think when I was kind of going through the tridactyl.org files, some of the larger specimens is what really blew my mind. Like Maria, I've heard this name said Joyce or Joyce, Spanish.
Joyce, yeah. It is Joyce, believe it or not. Even
And
though it's
Montserrat.
Hispanic.
Is that correct?
Yeah, Joyce was named after the Peruvian reporter. But
okay.
Since neither of us believe that these were originally real at first, I'd like to cover some of the morphology here. So
Sure.
I'm not just doing this in a void. I listened to Dr. Jose Zalci Benitez, a Mexican forensic officer for the Mexican military. So here is this gentleman, again, forensic officer for the Mexican military, testifying before his Congress, before his people, as to what he believes were once living things. But I didn't stop there. I also researched Cliff Miles, a published paleontologist in Canada who has his own firm, who he too looked at these bodies. Now, coming from a museum background, coming from an anthropology background, I have done paleontological work, not in the field. In fact, when everybody went out into the field, I was stuck minding the store, if you will, so I stayed home. But I have done lab work, and I've worked alongside Bobby De Palma, who is a bit of a paleontologist prodigy. He's appeared on Attenborough on BBC, and I've helped him build these dinosaurs with the armatures. So there is some interesting morphology that we should cover before people even dismiss this as merely fake. And one of those things is to look at this here furcula. So this furcula, and there's argument whether it's a true furcula or not, but regardless, the two clavicles meet here in the center. So this furcula, our museum was one of the first to have a display that focused on the furcula. The furcula is something people see every Thanksgiving. It's essentially a wishbone. And so this was a key back in the day of demonstrating that birds were in fact descendants of dinosaurs. In fact, I worked with a biologist, Dr. Fred Shahaki, when people would say, did birds come from dinosaurs? And he would straight up say, birds are dinosaurs. Let's switch this bone and tissue setting to an X-ray setting. So we are looking at Josephina. Again, these are the ones that were originally dismissed as dolls, but after having the furcula pointed out and the gastralia, which are stomach ribs, which can be found in crocodilians, these began to make these things much more real to me. And of course, there are the eggs. Now, those eggs, researchers have drilled into them, and they found calcium carbonate, which is what eggs are made of. So, yeah, I think that's just something of what what other structures have I noted on these? Well, they have the little ones have rostrum beaks. So while the larger, more human ones, so theoretically these are about 3 to 5% primate, these small ones, while something like Maria is more like 30 to 33%. Also, something very robust here that, again, why these aren't fake besides those bones are these robust ear bones, which after doing some research, now I also worked alongside a marine biologist, Dr. Ed Patuk, who's we would go to the seafood raw bars, and he would take delight in demonstrating the sex of the oysters you were eating, which was always an odd thing. He has some specimens named after himself, but he taught me about whale ear bones. Now, this isn't quite a whale ear bone, but with a little bit of research, it appears that, sure enough, it does seem to resemble amphibian or marine mammal ear bone. So this is not a human ear bone. This is not an ear bone that you're going to typically see in other animals. And again, when I speak of the rostrum, it's these plate-like beaks in the front of these creatures. So these little ones are definitely very much real. And we can kind of see another part of my research here. This is an original find that, so some of the things, a lot of the things have not been collaborated by others. You know, I'm not a medical doctor. I have tried writing a report, but again, I come from like teaching. I wanted to teach social studies to kids. But I also believe I discovered that parietal pineal complex that you talked about, which we might be able to see better in other specimens, which I suspected was in this region. And the only reason I suspected it is because of human mythology.
Third eye, I imagine, is where you were going.
The third eye. So the third eye said, I'll bet you these guys have a third eye. So what I did was I took some images of what I believe is a parietal pineal complex that is reflective, high calcium organs within the skull. And I sent this image to the leading researcher in parietal pineal glands. This is a gentleman who wrote about, calls them four-eyed lizards, if you will. And the reason they use the term four-eyed is because these organs are photoreceptors. And he said, wow, that skull looks like a primate or a mammal. Why does it have a parietal pineal complex near the top of its skull? And basically I was like, thank you, sir. I didn't tell him what he was looking at. I didn't tell him this is a tridactyl alien. And of course, getting to that point, I don't even call them aliens. I like the term terrestrial. Some say ultra-terrestrial. That, again, looking at the morphology, we're looking at morphology that can be found right here on planet Earth. There's nothing unusual. What's unusual is to see all of these things in one specimen. And if you consider that these creatures likely breathe cutaneously, like an amphibian, tridactyly, like an amphibian, and what other research have alluded to as a tubular heart, all this morphology together, combined with looking at the unknown DNA, so something like this Josephina may have about 65% unknown DNA. When you extrapolate the unknown DNA going back in time, combined with all these morphological traits together in one specimen, you would have to go back hundreds and hundreds of millions of years to find something that would have all of this together.
Evolutionarily speaking.
So while we talk some more, I'm going to go ahead and unless you have anything else you'd like to look at on Josephina, I'm going to go ahead and close Josephina and pull up. Would you like to see Maria? Well, let's see Maria, because Josephina is sort of the species prime, if you will. You could call her the temporary holotype, meaning she is the representative of the smaller beings. They call them reptilian. I think the better term is amphibian. So we're going to look at Maria, who's sort of the holotype for the more primate specimens. So I'm going to do that.
In your opinion, do you think that the smaller specimens like that are a progenitor of the later, more hybrid beings then?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. That's why when people dismiss them, it's like, well, you can't have the others without this one. And bear in mind, too, there's the so-called insectoids, another term I don't like. There's been some missteps. There's going to be difference in opinions. And I knew that was going to happen with me. I knew there's going to be not just skeptics, but there was going to be believers who are also going to disagree with you. And that's okay. But, the-alien-project.com, great site. But is it a misstep because they called them aliens? Is it a misstep because they call them reptilians? Is it a misstep because they call them insectoids? Because the insectoids are missing all I'd say 90% of the hallmarks that would make something an insect. But those species, the so-called insectoids like Suye and Nukari are some of the names, are even more primitive and probably have zero primate in them. One of the things we look at these strange-looking heads of Josephina, but really the skull isn't that different than some primitive humans. They have those supraorbital arches. That cordiform or heart shape is coming from those distinct brow ridges. And even these sort of elongated skull you can see in things like Denisovan. So,
even Neanderthal had much more prominent brow ridge.
Exactly. But when you look at the insectoids, those are a flat face creature. They are elongated. It doesn't look like they have any ribs. They have spinal eminences coming off them. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to get access to the DICOMs for those, which is too bad because they ended up giving access to a Phil Brown, a Dr. Stephen Brown, who was a philosophy professor, who initially came out with a video saying how much he believed these were real and why you should consider this. And then oddly, he came out with another video saying these are fake, that the insectoids are a parrot skeleton. And I even said to him recently, I'm like, man, I don't know who told you that, because I can't find anything even remotely similar to a parrot. That's just a very strange thing for him to say. In fact, he was one of the reasons why I started to make videos and live appearances, because I realized, and I knew this day was coming also, that there would be skeptics that would put out essentially propaganda, if you will, that these were fake. And I felt it was my duty as an educator, not as a grifter, as an educator, to get out in front and say, we got problems. We've got lying politicians. We've got CGI. We've got AI. It's going to be tough to convince people once they're convinced otherwise. So yeah, it did become a bit of a personal thing with me. And so it's unfortunate I don't have those scans, because they gave the scans to him,
Of course. Yeah.
So I'm going to go ahead while we talk. I'm going to go ahead and put Josephina away, and we're going to pull up Maria.
I believe Maria was the first one that I saw. And the CT
I think the researchers wanted to go with a sort of easy kind of goalpost here. We could demonstrate that Maria was real. She's larger. There was less skepticism. There was more for people to understand. I did the opposite. I wanted to focus on the smaller ones, mostly because they're the ones depicted more so in the petroglyphs. And I thought we would learn more from the smaller ones, which I believe I have.
But even Maria and the other larger specimens, they have the elongated skulls and a lot of things that we see like in Paracas and some of the earlier specimens that, didn't quite match the current DNA paradigm or record for anything else that we've seen.
Isn't that interesting too? It's like here we have these things that resemble the Paracas skulls, and yet there are people who study the Paracas skulls who seem to be distancing themselves from these. And it's very strange times. It's been an uphill battle. It's been much tougher than I thought it was going to be. Even with my own personal circle, friends who are into aliens and monsters and sci-fi and conspiracies, for some reason are super skeptical of things that we have physical evidence for.
I wonder what the root of that is. If it's just pressure from academia, or if it's...
I almost think some of it is, I hate to motive frame, where you try to come up with why people do things, because people do that to me. And it's like, you don't know why I'm doing something. But one of the things I almost feel like lately is that people don't want to feel like they're getting tricked. So it's almost like an ego thing where they feel like they're getting tricked. And so they have to demonstrate how they're smarter than that, and they're not getting tricked.
I guess the burden of proof has kind of gone up with the advent of AI and all of the, fraudulent things that we've seen. So I guess it kind of makes sense for everybody to be a little more apprehensive about stuff.
Yeah. I mean, again, when I saw them too, I was like, oh, geez, another alien autopsy? Like, we need that. Right? But thank God for men like Zalcy Benitez and paleontologist Miles, because again, coming from a museum world, I understood where they were coming from, and I found them credible and believable. A lot of people like to bring up this Masan guy, who, to be honest, Masan in Peru is sort of a persona non grata himself.
Yeah.
So it's weird that they focus on this gentleman and they'll ignore the 40 other researchers, myself included.
I think he's probably the easiest to debunk. He's come out with some stuff that's been disproven in the past, and it's kind of easy to point to him like, oh, he's just an alien guy, conspiracy theorist, so we shouldn't believe any of this other stuff.
Yeah, and for myself, I was tired of hearing Anunnaki. I didn't see how something like a reptilian could be possible, and I'm super skeptical of the stories of the Bible. Now, I find myself putting all three of these in one cocktail trying to make sense of it all and trying to find the truth within all of them.
There definitely seems to be a through line with it all.
There seems to be a through line for sure.
Have they done any detailed metallurgical testing on those so we know what that is comprised of?
Now, I've only seen a few of the metallurgy. In fact, since you brought that up, let's go ahead and look at that first. I do have a table created. I haven't seen the metallurgy on what's known as the osmium. So it's hard for me to discuss that with real conviction.
Understand.
But apparently, there has been osmium found. Now, in the big hands, there was iron, which I find could possibly, maybe that's more interesting, is finding iron, because that would allude to there isn't iron used in the New World. That would allude to a European connection, which if you combine that with evidence of the Paracas skulls, the actual ones that Brian Forrester researches, those Paracas skulls are said to have European DNA. So I find that interesting. A lot of the metal they suggest is just a typical alloy that is used in making all the various artifacts. Obviously, the osmium is something that people really are interested in. I understand that. I just feel as the osmium does require more research. But if people want a confident answer on that, I would definitely go to the-alien-project.com, which is Terry Jamin's site, who wrote a great book on the lost Patiti, where he researches these very things. Let's see.
We discussed it briefly in the episode. It's definitely interesting because that particular metal would require processes that shouldn't have been really in existence to the point that these beings were living.
Exactly. So there's a lot of different metal, isn't there? Let's take a look at this. So let's see. What can you see on your screen right now?
It's kind of blurry. I'll try to make it a little larger here.
I've lost my ability to see you, so I'm not sure what you're seeing right now. There we are. I no longer see me. I just see you.
Yeah, I went ahead and went full screen on the screen sharing that you're doing right now so that people can hopefully be able to read that a little easier.
Again, I just see you. I hope that's okay.
Not a problem.
So you can actually, this is airing right now, this chart?
Yes, sir. That's what we got.
So Josephina, who we were just looking at, they're suggesting those breast implants are copper. You can see this is based on taking the metallurgy, what metallurgy there is available, and putting into an AI and having the AI give us a sort of breakdown of all this. So Albert has a hip implant, says copper silver alloy. And so the local alloy, they call it tumbaga, which is typical. And we can see that in some of the tridactyl hands. Arda, I haven't really investigated too much. Again, those scans aren't available. Large hand says iron chromium alloy, incompatible with pre-Columbian metallurgy. Suggests modern origin or contamination. And the last one, osmium, extremely dense and hard metal, rare and highly valuable. Its presence raised significant questions about its ancient usage. So again, metallurgy is not my strong point. I would definitely go and see what other research has been done out there and check out those other websites for sure. That's something obviously that people are going to want to see a lot more of.
Yeah, it's definitely really compelling. It's something that I think most people that are even maybe skeptical of the actual specimens can kind of dig into a little bit more. It's a little harder to refute.
I think, everyone's going to have their sort of, that's the beauty of this topic. It's the gift that keeps on giving if you're into research, because for me, it's taken me on a journey across the world, and not literally, but educationally. I suggest that all that evidence of mother goddess imagery and serpent imagery, all of that, and even the jade stone, the green stone cultural complex that you can see along the Pacific Rim, all of that led me to the Himalayan plateau, where we have the origin myth of beings, mythological beings like Naga and dragons. But have to remind people that when we say dragons, these aren't the monsters that St. George slays in Western tales. To people of Asia, these are the ancestors. So just another bit of that information leading us to non-human ancestral beliefs. So we talked about Josephina, which there was two that were presented to the Mexican Congress. There was Clara and Mauricio, who even Mr. Neil deGrasse Tyson dismissed as, well, why did they look so human? But on further investigation, we see they have a furcula and they have stomach ribs. So very, very much not human. So what's so special about Maria? What could we say about Maria? Well, for one, her DNA alludes to not one, but two different primate species. Now, there is some disagreement whether that is just human DNA that is coming up partially chimpanzee, as ours is. But I don't know, because it says bonobo DNA too, and I find that unusual. And besides, her robust rib cage seems to allude to something very much ape-like. And I don't know about her arm length, but Josephina's arms are longer than her legs. So what else can we say about...
Definitely pointing towards primate there.
Maria. So, of course, yeah, exactly. And Maria, what can we say about Maria? I'm trying to think of something interesting to say about her here. Well, there are no eggs in Maria. And of course, we want to talk about the tridactyly, the three fingers. So we can mention that the skeptics have suggested that Maria has been manipulated, but for every skeptic, there are 10 others, researchers, who say that is not true. So that's where the appeal to authority and sort of bias confirmation, I feel, is coming into play with some people, because we can have 10 researchers say there is no manipulation, and then one person puts out a nice video that says there is manipulation, and then suddenly everyone's like, see, I told you so. And that's bias. That's textbook bias confirmation. Trying to get her to stop moving. Okay. So we're trying to zoom in on the feet here. Now, what's interesting about Maria versus Montserrat is that the number of phalanges are different. So this could allude to the fact that the larger specimens, which we only have the hands for, those big hands, if you were to extrapolate the size of the fingers based on these other specimens here. So Maria's about 5'6". The big hands, which we could also look at, those might belong to something as large as 7 feet. Now we're getting into something intimidating. So I'm zooming in just on these phalanges here, see if we can get a better look at them. Now, some say, oh, well, that shows that they're not connected, but that's really just the scanning. We can adjust that too. In fact, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to switch to a different screen that helps me see.
Wouldn't that sort of compensate for like the loss of cartilage and things in between?
The cartilage seems to be relatively preserved on many of the specimens. So we can watch this as we switch to the intensity here, or not.
Yeah, we seem to be back on the metal screen here.
Oh, sorry. Let me switch that too. Yeah, I moved it over to a different screen so I can hopefully manipulate it better.
There we go.
How's that looking? Yeah.
Looks good.
Nice.
Okay, so that's not even actually a thing. And they seem completely intact there.
Right. So it gives that illusion. So we saw one of the skeptics who brought that up, and then the interviewer said, well, isn't that just, related to the density on that you're manipulating? And he says, well, they're not really a good image. So he blew it off himself, and this was supposed to be an expert, when all he had to do was get an actual x-ray. So how many phalanges are we seeing on Maria? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, it looks like.
It's interesting. The little tiny joints there towards the tip of the toes.
Yeah. So that may have, these may have, people are like, well, how could they manipulate things with just 3 fingers? Well, that may have helped, is that they were able to control, they had more spatial control just because of that. So Maria, let's take a look at that rib cage from this other side here. Very just robust rib cage, very ape-like in my opinion.
I agree.
And of course, Maria too has her like Montserrat has implants.
What do you think were the purpose of those implants?
So for me, I have a detailed theory. So one of my theories that, again, people don't really ascribe to is that I started to notice in the archaeological record and the cosmological narrative. So when people talk about reptilians, there was also lots of tales of amphibian beings. Perhaps the most famous to Western culture is the Frog Prince. So the Frog Prince, which we look as a fairy tale, is actually one of these myths that are documented across cultures that allude to cross-species integration. And another cultural complex were the Hongsheng pig dragons. And when I saw these Hongsheng pig dragons, as well as serpentine-shaped beings coming from the mouths of others, coming from the heads of others in Paracas and Nazca cultures, this was a clue to me that said, oh, I think these beings are amphibians simply based on cosmological narratives. And one of my favorites relates to the Frog Prince is the Northwest Pacific Coast Indians, where a Native American princess marries into a frog, the frog people.
We've covered in detail a lot of Native American myths and legends. I have really close Choctaw lineage and always been very compelled by the things that were handed down to us throughout history with that. But that's actually one that I've never heard of.
Yeah, look up I believe it's a frog princess, and they take her to their underwater kingdom, and I think other myths say when she comes back, she ends up vomiting up insects and worms. So an amphibian trait, if we were to believe that, is ovoviviparity. That is that the eggs may hatch within the body. There's also something called gastric brooding and mouth brooding, where even the male of the species may collect the young and carry them in their mouth. Well, I started seeing a lot of this motif. And again, these pig dragons and also the Adogu, the same people that have those highly realistic ceramics of tridactyl beings with cordiform faces, they also have a Magatama culture, which are little ceramic commas, if you will, that even before the tridactyls, many researchers and archaeologists suggest these are fertility-related symbolism. So these were clues to me that the ancients were aware of an amphibian metamorphosis that included serpentine, tadpole-like shapes. So with my research, I did go into the bodies, and I do believe I found evidence of this. Now, other research have said to me, well, I asked someone, I'm like, did you tell the other medical researchers about the larvae I found? And he said, well, they didn't see any. So for me to find this larva, I had to go into a very, very deep into the body. I had to make sure I was looking at things that were a millimeter to a centimeter in size. So these weren't something that someone was just going to run across. I suggest the only reason I was able to find them is that I knew they were there. So let me show you some. You asked about the implants, right? Let me go back to some things here. So what we're going to look at here is in Louisa. Louisa is another specimen like Josephina. I spent much of my time looking into these here. So this is one specimen, but probably the best specimen I think I've found so far in Louisa that seems to demonstrate not only a larval form, but a larval form engaged in adulfophagy or sibling predation. So it appears to be clutching a younger, less developed form in its primitive hands.
Sure.
Now, in addition to that, throughout the bodies, what I believe
was this present in Maria?
I have found larval forms in Maria. So I have found the same, even in Wawita, who is sort of a phodactyl. She is the one that they say that was manipulated. That's the other interesting thing. It's a very strange choice some of the skeptics have made. They focused on Maria, suggesting she was manipulated, yet they didn't bother to compare, and again, this is suspicious, with Wawita, who clearly had digits removed. But despite her having digits removed, I still believe that she has larval forms within her. So this is what I believe are many of the forms throughout the bodies, and it's just their heads. Now, as a bit of science to dispute pareidolia, the eyes come up voids, the beaks come up a harder density, and the surrounding bone that I suggest they're burrowing through comes up with an even greater density.
Interesting.
So I wanted to overwhelm the viewer with multiple images of what I believe are larval forms. You know, when people looked at the little bodies, they said, why does it look like ET? When the question is, why does ET look like them? And if you look at some of these, you may see little ET-like shapes. So it is my ultimate theory. And again, you can see this in the South American ceramics. You can see four-limb first development of tridactyl beings. And I mean by four-limb first, so like an axolotl. You can see depictions of this. So I'm at a stage, you know, we talked about me. I'm no longer with coincidence. You know, I have my background in archaeology. I'm starting to realize that these depictions aren't just fanciful imaginations.
Sure.
So I suggest that the implants such as Alberto's hip implant, which I believe I see a tridactyl feeding right above that. In the furcula, it looks like I see larvae burrowing into the furcula, and those furculas are fractured. Now, the fractures have been noted by researchers. It is my belief that due to the diatomaceous earth, so that's that white powdery substance that you see around it, many times used to dissuade insects. I believe that this diatomaceous earth combined with the cadmium chloride, which is said to be also very similar to the osmium in that it requires a intense industrial creation method to make this, that these two substances may have not only suffocated the host, if they are truly cutaneous breathers, but may have served to retain and seal these larval forms within.
So you don't think this was like a post-mortem preservation, mummification kind of thing? You think it could actually have played a role in their passing then?
Right. So perhaps, you know, I can't, again, I'm now we're motive framing. Why did they do that? Perhaps they didn't, are these a problem? I don't know, you know. But not only that, they were probably alive while some of this was going on. Artemis, for example, another Josephina type, has several implants down the middle of her chest. So there's some of this may have occurred while they were alive. Hence, Alberto has that hip implant. Hence, the chest implants. So if you consider that these may have that four-limb first development, to have your furcula fractured seems disastrous to someone like that. So these implants may have even been done early on to ensure that, knowing that it was going to happen, or were done afterwards due to that fractured furcula, that fractured dual clavicle.
Now, is there evidence of like bone grafting onto these implants, like a growth that occurred after they were put in?
Right. So even Sebastian, they suggest that there is growth there, and I'm still a little skeptical. I know, again, I don't have a medical degree, and I'm not a doctor, so it's going to be hard for people to take my word over those people. But if they're not aware of the larval presence, they might be making inaccurate, you know, diagnosis. And we have to keep in mind there's going to be different opinions on this. So Sebastian, they suggest there is flesh growth behind his implant. It's also where I've seen what I believe are larvae. And again, so just to let your viewers know, there is conflicting opinions on that. My opinion isn't fully accepted on that. I do want to offer a bit of evidence in support of my theory, though, which is the implant, in my opinion, on Sebastian appears to show boring evidence, meaning these, again, as I suggest, they likely bore through bones, compromising the form of these beings, but also may have attempted to bore through these implants.
But you don't think that's like a parasitic thing? You think that's actually part of their reproduction?
Yeah, I don't think. Well, here's the thing: when you have amphibian larvae, even in a constricted environment, which we could say this body is a constricted environment, even in nature, what happens is, and keep in mind too in nature that there is evidence of matrophagy amongst Sicilian worms, which means that they're eating the mother's flesh. So this could just be a perverse version of matrophagy due to a constricted environment. And also adelphophagy, sibling predation, occurs amongst larvae in a constricted environment. So we're going to look at the back of Sebastian's implant here. So this is an implant, again, just to demonstrate there's different opinions. There are people suggesting that his implant shows writing, which I'd like to think that maybe that's part of something that I might know something about, and I don't think it's writing. I think it's evidence of boring. These irregular holes here are on the interior. And when I look at the inside of Luisa's skull also appears to have boring. And these gray spots here may actually be juvenile larvae. Luisa's body is not available currently. So even when I ran this through the AI, yes, they suggested it looked like something you would see from a parasite. But they're acting like parasites because they're in that restricted environment. That's my theory. And I've found enough of the larvae, and I've found them near and in and around the furcula that, I'm convinced that that's exactly what we're seeing.
Seems like a weird adaptation or evolutionary step that would cause that. I'm just curious.
Again, they weren't offered that opportunity to be born.
Yeah. You think that's because of a different environment, or what do you think would have maybe been
that
the
diatomaceous earth
behavior?
and that cadmium chloride thwarted them from coming out. Now, did they do that purposely? Was it because they didn't want these being born along a journey? While ovoviviparity is natural, also, is it because of the hybridization? So are we looking at an issue between primate birth and amphibian birth? Is that what we're seeing here?
Getting towards there.
So I don't think this is I don't think I would call this a natural thing. It's a good adaptive thing if things aren't going well. So what if the mother dies? The mother dies. This still allows these things a chance to be a chance at life. Perhaps ultimately the mother, the progenitor, would want to get to a secluded saline lake or a secluded body of water, where then they would either cough up these through their mouth, such as the gastric or mouth brooding, which is demonstrated in amphibians. In fact, here's just a cool little graphic that I have here, just showing you just an example of a frog. So this is a natural thing. Let me show you some other things here while we're a little blurry, but this is just above Alberto's implant. You can see that reflective piece there. That is an implant in his hip. And what I'm suggesting above him here is a larval form feeding. And I started to notice too this high density sort of strand coming from many of the mouths, which according to researchers, there is a feeding orifice, and you can see that. I don't know if I have a close-up picture. You can see that in the scans yourself. There's a hole within their mouth that they call a feeding orifice. I'm suggesting even beyond that, since I'm seeing these strands coming from their mouths, and it's a high density, so it's not liquid, that they actually have some sort of a primitive hummingbird-like proboscis. It's another just image showing what I believe are two different forms of the larva. And again, for all the viewers out there, I like to preface, this is not confirmed by other researchers.
What do you think is the mechanism for them to be able to go eat through the bone without having, any kind of like mandible thing? Is it like a gastro acid that's kind of...
No, they have rostrum beaks, which you can see in the older... Remember I pointed that out earlier?
Right. Okay.
They have rostrum beaks, and what you can see in the scans is that, again, that's one of the reasons why I tell people, they say that it's pareidolia to me. I'm saying, but there's a clear difference between the flesh around them, between the bone that I suggest they're burrowing through, and these rostrum beaks. So they, if people like the Japanese yokai, take a look at the kappa. The kappa creature, which is what I named I gave the name for this pneumatic area here. A better name for it might be a fontanelle, because it's a much like a the soft skull of a human child.
Sure.
Which, here's one of my discoveries also. Now, the rostrum isn't, I wouldn't say it's a discovery of mine, but it's something that many of the researchers aren't talking about. Ironically, that rostrum and this whole feeding concept I have, what I'm seeing is these tridactyl larvae, the older ones are sinking their rostrum beak. Can you see this? Because I can't tell how much screen I have.
Yeah, you're on screen.
They're sticking their rostrum beak right into that soft spot, perhaps to get to the pineal gland. So what you get from me is you'll get from a lot of the other researchers or talking heads, you'll say a lot of people saying, well, we really don't know.
Yeah.
What I'm trying to do is provide a cohesive, total theory. That's why it's beyond the hypothesis. I like to think of these as all of these are different hypotheses that I'm trying to put together in one cohesive theory of what we're seeing. I'm feeling confident about it. One of the researchers at tridactyls.org says, I only have to worry if I'm wrong. And that's how I feel.
Right.
Here's another image of one of the original images without editing of the larva I found in Josephina. This is the head here. It appears as though they're unicarpal, which again, you can see on the specimens. They don't have one singular hand bone, the little ones. They have a large bone. Looks like we're seeing that here. In other specimens, I can see what I believe is the tail. And then a faux tail here is because the feet are still merged. And then even these right here, which might not seem like much to people, these little ridges, I suggest these are the overlapping spinal plates that you can see in the specimens. And then note too, it looks like the central vertical column, well, maybe those are eggs because I also suggest they might be born pregnant, but I can see these also in the archaeological record where it seems like the ancients were actually depicting that very thing that you can see here. So here are what I suggest are 4 different tridactyls exhibiting forelimb first development and also depicted in the archaeological record. And this is what I was pointing on that last one. You see these white dots that they've added to this art?
Sure.
It looks like, to me, what we were just looking at. So it's a lot.
And that is actually from the Nazca culture, right?
Exactly. That's specifically the Nazca culture.
Intriguing.
So yeah, I'd like to think I have a cohesive hypothesis that seems to be tying a lot of this together. So I call it, the amphibian assertion, meaning that I'm confident that these are amphibians based on the cutaneous breathing and the tridactyly alone. Evidence of ovoviviparity. That's a term that you may start hearing more. I did hear one of the researchers say that, which is good. I keep listening to see what they're going to cover of my stuff. And not a lot. There hasn't been it's been a little bit of a roadblock despite my best efforts to contact people. Because, I feel like too, is this going to be like some sci-fi movie where people don't believe me and maybe it could be problematic?
Yeah. So would you say that kind of in the research, you've diverted from the more mainstream study of the tridactyls, like what they're doing on tridactyl.org? Or do you think that you both have,
I feel like most of the researchers for a long time now, and I've critiqued this, is when you talk to the researchers, what are they going to tell you? They're going to tell you they have 3 fingers and elongated skulls.
Yeah.
Stop. That's it. And myself as a researcher, I felt like we needed more. I thought I was just going to play intermediary and tell people what the researchers found. I ended up becoming hungry for more information and delving into this. And I thought too, I was just going to focus on the cultural studies. Hey, look at this cool artifact. Doesn't that look like them? I thought that was going to be my focus, but I definitely feel like I've evolved past that. And if people are going to critique my larva assertion, then I want to hear them say that they're not amphibians, because if they are amphibians, guess what that means? Let's go back to Maria and see if we can find something here. I thought of something cool to talk about with Maria. Okay. So there is something they like to talk about, which is her fused lower vertebra or her lack of a coccyx, which we have, which is ironic, is that, if we're so advanced, how come we still have tailbones? We still have evidence of tailbones. We're going to zoom in here and we're going to look at that fused vertebra. And while I didn't discover the fused vertebra, I believe I have a good identification for it. Boy, good thing I got that beverage. I'm getting that like dusty throat kind of thing.
Oh, yeah. You'll get parched the longer these go on.
So we're gonna reduce the image here. I think everything's working I don't know, for some reason today, everything's working a little slower than normal. I wonder if I have anything open that I can close.
I think technology somehow knows whenever you're trying to do something and you need it to cooperate.
Yeah, because sometimes it's fine and it's just like, okay, what's the problem today? I always wonder, it's like, why something doesn't work on a computer, and I just go through the steps again and it works. I'm just like, what the hell?
When you were zoomed in there a minute ago, I noticed something that kind of looked like, I guess we call it a protuberance, that looked like it extended down. Yeah, kind of where your cursor was there.
That's what we're going for.
Okay.
So this is their fused lower vertebra. But in my opinion, this is something else. This is a Euro-style found in an anurin. Anurin is a frog. When you look at frogs, after their tails are resorbed into their body, they are left with a bone not too different from that. And that's why I'm trying to, if anyone goes, now keep in mind, everyone can go to tridactyls.org and they can get this very exact DICOM I'm looking at myself. You will have to get for free. I use a couple of different readers.
Yeah.
But this one is 3D Slicer. It's been very enjoyable for me. I try to look at these every day. Part of my goal is to find that skeptic killer in the larva, because for a lot of people, I just think they don't understand why there would be larva. And yes, a lot of people go to that parasite because it seems detrimental, right?
Yeah.
Detrimental if you can't give birth, a survival strategy if you can't give birth as well, though.
Sure.
So what I'm doing is I'm just trying to reduce everything else around that particular bone so we get a better view of it. And what you guys can do also, once you learn about you can switch the settings that allow us, like we can switch back to X-ray and we can play with the intensity so it comes back. But really, I think that last setting was probably fine. Let's go back to that.
Yeah, I think that was probably the best view.
So anyway, this very strange linear bone, I suggest, is the Euro style of an amphibian. Occasionally I pause even while I'm doing this. I'm like, what the hell is that? Like right here, this could be this is what could be fun about doing this live sometimes, is that
Sure. Yeah.
this could be those could be larvae within her. Or it could be something else. It could be pareidolia. I try not to post anything unless I'm confident. But look at this here. I'm seeing like even this zigzag, which I'm sure the radiologist will suggest is just
an artifact, probably.
An artifact.
But it does have a different contrast, it seems, than the rest of the structures around it, though.
It does, doesn't it? Here, let's try another setting. We can go to soft tissue setting and look at that. That's suspicious.
That makes it look even more like an implant or something.
So the soft tissue setting, I do spend a lot of time on that, trying to separate bone from flesh. So this is somewhat odd, this area here, for real.
Yeah, it is.
As we look at it, this is a soft, that's the other thing I say to the skeptics. I'm like, I've had people say, well, it's bone. I'm like, I'm on a soft tissue setting, you know? Another time they're like, oh, it's just muscle. And I'm like, but it's highly reflective when I had a skeleton. That's just one of, again, I have plenty of my own discoveries. And I think part of it has to deal with a dedication of looking at these every day, looking at artifacts every day. When I tell people I've been doing this full time, that means typically my days for the last going on 2.5 years, 3 years now, has been this research. So, am I a xenoanthropologist? I don't have another job at this time. So I felt like this has been like sort of somewhat my duty, if you will,
right.
to
I think you're certainly as close as we've got to one.
Yeah, exactly. I'm doing my best here, guys. And it's funny too. Some people complain about the blurry images because they're so used to critiquing Bigfoot photos and UFOs in the sky. I'm like, man, this ain't the same.
Right.
This is a scan that we can look at in 3 dimensions. So I get a little pissy sometimes when people critique the image.
Well,
It's
people aren't
like,
going to want to do the work if they can help it. That's the thing. I mean, it's
that's
so
the other
much
thing
easier
too.
to.
It's like, yeah, get in there, look at the scans yourself. But we just had a great find today. You know, be happy while we're here that, you know, I found some unusual, at least anomalies in Maria as we're as we're doing this, right?
Right.
Even yourself noted the difference, right? This clearly that's a different intensity than the others. So I'm going to go ahead. If you want to keep talking, I'm going to close this because you want to see Montserrat, right?
Yeah, if we can. I'd love to
And
touch
maybe a
on
good
that one.
time for me too to use that room of resting, right?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting specimen as well. Montserrat's the one that was they feel is pregnant, had like a full secondary tridactyl being within it, correct?
Yes. Which, by the way, is very hard to locate. One, and see, it's funny too. Like my stuff will get critiqued, but I don't know if you realize this, but like, I don't know if it was the Mexican hearing, but like one of their experts suggested that these were humans from the future. So here I
I
am
saw that.
doing my damn best to show you archaeological evidence and biological evidence. And then there's people like this who are there appeal to authority
Right.
suggesting that they're humans for the future. And it's just like, oh man, even recently I saw in an interview, one of their lead researchers is like, well, maybe they were telepathic. It's well, how the hell do you know
Based on
that?
what? Right.
Based on what? You know,
So,
or that metal implant that they suggest is writing. Okay, well, recreate one character from this writing that you suspect. And to me, I just looked at the interior of it and said, that's not writing. That's a impression from things boring on the inside.
yeah, it looks a lot closer to holes of some sort than actually any sort of attack.
Yeah, at least from the interior. Now, the exterior is what they suggest looks like writing, but if you look at the interior that I showed you, right? I mean, it looks similar to something you would see like a termite or a carpenter ant engage in. But I'm glad you asked the question, well, how the hell would they do that? Yeah, they got beaks.
I was going to ask, Montserrat has the tridactyl, like live birth situation possibly going on, we believe. Do you feel that that would put her further down the evolutionary chain between the amphibian to primate transition? Okay.
Exactly. But good job. But keep in mind also, some amphibians have live birth.
True.
There are some frogs that give live birth. And that being said, now here's another thing that we can talk about with her. Hopefully we can find evidence today. I say today because, you know, sometimes it's hard for me to either locate it or remember where I saw it. But I believe I'm seeing amphibian spawns within the hybrids. So alluding to what you're saying is these, are they giving birth in a different way? But I'm seeing these murky masses within the larger hybrids with high density, tiny things within them. I don't know if those tiny things are eggs or multiple larvae. In some amphibians, it's suggested that a young could stay within the mother for as long as 12 months. So we're pulling up Montserrat. I got her up. Just got to make sure that the 3D.
And is there any significant difference as far as the DNA profiling between Maria and Montserrat?
Yeah, so when you look at Maria and Victoria, I don't know about Montserrat. I don't think Montserrat's, I'll bet you her DNA is coming because there's 6 specimens they're supposed to release the DNA for. And boy, is that going to be a barrage of data, isn't it?
Yeah, for sure.
That's going to change things greatly. But between Victoria, who is the headless specimen, who may be depicted in the archaeological record, and that's why I suggest some of these may be individuals. You know, Alberto with his hip implant, you know, there are myths of lame gods.
Interesting.
So I suggest these may be individuals from history, not just random critters. Okay, so we're going to take a look at Maria. Montserrat. We just got done with Maria. And she is similar to Maria. I believe she has less, I get the two confused, less phalanges. I can't wait to see her DNA. So she's famous for a couple reasons. She has this really pronounced implants on her. Look at that skull. What a beautiful skull.
Clearly elongated. It doesn't look like there's any sagittal suture either.
Yeah, let's see if we
It's
can
kind of
see.
hard to tell from this angle, but
Definitely, it's program's acting a little slow today.
still amazing to look at. And I mean, I guess if you see them just from the outside with the diatomaceous earth on them and the weird look about them, it would be kind of easy to just dismiss it. But when you look at something like this
Right.
and you see the continuous skeleton that's clearly, a
Yeah.
life form, I don't really see how people can doubt that that's what that is.
Well, one of the things they're suggesting, of course, is that they're manipulated. But even the people that are suggesting these are manipulated have kind of steered away from the little ones. And so when people say that, I bring up the fact, well, that the little ones have furcula, they have gastralia, they have parietal pineal complexes, which is that third or technically four eyes.
Right.
And you can learn about four eyes in lamprey and in extinct monitor lizards, which was some of the research. So I'm just zooming in on the feet just to. Oh, and by the way, too, when they talk about the feet being manipulated, the whole heel structure on these are completely different. So how many? Whoa, we're in there close, aren't we? You don't always get all these
Crazy looking.
close-ups, though. Again, like you mentioned, you get cursory pictures many times of. So let's see,
Yeah.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Bone structure does look slightly different, but it's kind of hard to tell into the toes there.
I believe she has one less phalange than.
That's what it looks like.
There's an interesting myth about Set, the Egyptian god Set, that when
Sure.
I believe it was Horus flung semen at Set, or there's two different ones. She either flung semen or Set ate lettuce with semen on it, that when Set became pregnant, a gold disc appeared on its skull.
Right.
I don't know if we can get a better look at that disc with a different.
And speaking of Egyptology, real quick, I think it's really interesting. I'm not sure which one it is. I think maybe it's Joyce that kind of, to me, has a close resemblance to like Akhenaten or the depictions that we've seen of Akhenaten.
Have you heard me say that? Because that's exactly what I say.
I haven't, but that's the first
exactly
thing I saw.
what I say. I said that looks like Akhenaten.
It does.
Wow, I can't believe you said that. Yeah, man. Same. Isn't that wild?
And he had the elongated skull and a lot of the features that you see in these things, which is really
and
fascinating.
Sometimes depicted on all fours.
And
so
I don't
what should we talk?
know.
Yeah.
I was just gonna say, I don't know if we ever got a conclusive body of him, did we?
No. There was something I had noticed on a previous image. I think it was Montserrat, where it looked like there may have been like a larval form in her eyes and in her bones. Let's see if I can just zoom in on that eye. That's the other thing, with some cursory investigations, people are suggesting that the eye sockets are greater on these. It's unfortunate things are moving so slow. Well, you can't see it. Let me go back to my screen here. I'm just trying to zoom in on the eye, but look at this, an implant on their chest. I mean, I think Montserrat may have 7 implants. Now, of course, so what else is interesting is that the suggestion about the child, which is very hard for me to find. In fact, you know what? Let's go ahead and look at some of the skeptics say, well, how come you never use the proper CT scans? Because it's just not as cool as the 3D. That's the reason. They think it's a conspiracy, like we're trying to hide something. I'm like, no, it's just not as cool. I'd rather look at the 3D.
I would say you get way more details out of these anyway.
So here's the proper scan. So we're looking straight on at Montserrat's body. People had suggested that she was clutching the child where her womb would be, but guess what? That child isn't in the center.
Really hard to, okay. So that's like the front of her body.
Right. Let's see, what can we give you? So let's maybe start with the skull so people can get a reference point. Yeah.
Right.
So right now we're going to zoom in. This is now it's part of the problem with all of these is that since almost all of them, their heads are bent, It's hard to get a true axial cut where you go straight down from the top, and it's hard to get a true coronal cut where you just go forward in because of that head being bent. So this is the top of the skull. I'm going to zoom in on this too. And we're just going to start. That looks like probably her knee, I'm guessing. Yeah.
Yeah, probably.
Probably the two knees and her skull. And we're moving in. We're in the interior of the skull now. And we're just trying to get to the, you can see her teeth appearing here. And our goal really is just to get to the torso right now. That looks like her shoulders and the top of her spinal cord is starting to appear. Here's one of her feet, or now it's one of her hands.
Yeah, because they're down in front of her, sort of in front of like the lower stomach area, right?
This is looking into the torso, where like Waita, it's sort of, it seems very cavernous to me. It seems very much like there are chambers. I've found it very hard to identify organs, and at the same time, I haven't heard a lot of researchers talk about the organs.
I was curious about that.
I thought the researchers, honestly, were going to be more forthcoming, and the way it appeared, I thought they were going to be giving us like daily updates. And it
you would think it was something this immense.
Yeah, so that became a little disappointing for me. This is the pelvic region down the bottom here.
You were talking about subcutaneous respiration, so I'm guessing that we're not seeing lung structures in these beings, really?
They haven't been noted for sure in the smaller ones. I have heard talk about lungs in the larger ones. I haven't really been able to identify them myself. So despite my pre-med anthropology, it's still very hard to figure out what's going on within. But it does look very cavernous and sort of missing organs, in my opinion. So we've got the column, and I think Raphael is starting to appear over here. So this looks like a skull and a rib cage. But part of the point is it's not centered as you would expect. And it's making me consider, if I'm seeing forms on either side, is it possible that these hybrids are dual uterine? Is it possible they have twin uterus? Why is the child on the side?
As far off to the side as it is, yeah.
Yeah, and so that was one of the difficulties of investigating these at first, was like, well, where is this child that they found? That robust section here, that could be the ear bones. It's like we're getting some of the rib cage here, yeah. Is that a tridactyl limb?
That's what I was wondering, yeah. That's one of the arms coming down there. It's kind of crazy. The head seems so bulbous, like what you see in fetus development in humans. Like most of the growth is within the skull area. Yeah, it's a lot more dramatic than the adult ones anyway.
It seems, yes, you'll see that too. I do have a couple of the young ones here too. We have Sebastian and Santiago we could look at. So yeah, it requires some serious investigation by many individuals, which I think it's great that the scans are available.
Yeah. Imagine the more eyes we get on it, the more information will come out.
That's what I was hoping, right? There should be more of that. So Raphael, the child within, is very hard to locate and identify, especially if you're looking for it in the center at first.
You definitely can see the bone structures and the skull and all of that, though. I mean, and again, it's clearly there.
There's different images we could play with. You can also we can mark it, right? We can mark something like this, and then we can go to a different cut, like this sagittal cut here, and maybe we have a better chance of seeing something.
I really like this program, by the way, man. I would waste hours and hours with this thing.
Right? Yeah. Exactly. So everyone should go to tridactyls.org, get their Maria, get their Wawita. There'll probably be others available one day. If you are in the medical field, you can just ask for full access, and then you'll have access to Josephina and Victoria and Louisa. But we're just seeing if we can we find Raphael still. And, again, it's difficult at times. But yeah, this program will keep you busy for sure.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Especially if if anyone believes that there are larvae to be found, then you really start to squint and yeah, and start zooming in, and let's see if we can find one of these, what I suggest are spawns.
When you were on the side view there, what are those structures that kind of look like spinal protrusions almost, like a ridge kind of? Is
On
that
her?
just the spinal column, the shape of the bones in the spinal column? It just
Well,
seems like there's kind of extensions coming off of them in a way.
it definitely looks like the smaller ones, that there's these overlapping
Like plates
spinal
almost.
plates.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say that, right? Now, this is something great. Like, well, wouldn't it be great if we had some sort of, spinal expert on the show next, just to be able to verify that. But these are what I'm seeing in the smaller ones and in the larva, that same structure. So that's why it's important, I think, to look at all these specimens as a whole.
I mean, they definitely look distinct from just the vertebrae because, I mean, you've got the vertebrae in front there and they're very distinct. You see that. But then there is something of looks like maybe a slightly higher density that protrudes off of them.
And there's also in between a very distinct central chamber that in the smaller ones, to me, seems to lead to a cloaca, which makes the eggs even stranger. The eggs almost appear on the smaller ones to be where you would find like a womb, perhaps, in a primate. Yet I've asked to get in touch with some of these researchers because I'm having trouble seeing an exit point for the eggs to the cloaca. But you remind me, I can add like a camera to like something like this also. Let's see if I can copy this real quick. I'm just going to try something anyway, what else? I said we'd try to look for some of these masses, maybe
And
better in
remind
some.
me, what was the metal that was found in front, like the pineal plate there that we
What was the metal on her specifically? Most of them appears to be a local alloy. So it's a mix of copper, gold, and maybe nickel, I think.
was that common for work in that area during that
Yeah,
period?
that's common. The unusual stuff, of course, is the iron and the osmium.
Yeah.
So what else? What else would you like to see on her?
What did the teeth structure look like in these?
Sure, let's take a look at that. Wonder if the teeth structure might be better to look at on the back to the 3D.
Probably.
So it's interesting how this is set up right now. It's just showing you all of the implants that are in her. So
I was
again,
wondering what that was.
what would all the implants be for, right? And everyone wanted to look into the implants to see if they could. They were like radio telegraphs or something crazy. And for me, again, I just suggest this is all probably part of larva extraction. Alberto had those inner ear capsules I showed you. Alberto's inner ear capsule appears to be removed and is now on the exterior of his body. So is that just part of my larval extraction theory?
And I found it really interesting, although these are completely separate, that the specimens that we see in the tridactyls are in the same position as what you see in the cemeteries down there, which I would say even more closely ties them to that region and this culture. I just thought that was kind of interesting that is a way
Yeah,
that they bury
so
their dead.
why did they bury them like that?
Also a
They're
good
called
question.
many times they're sometimes buried in ceramic pots. Sometimes they're buried in shafts. In fact, we had a replica shaft tomb at the museum I worked at, the Graves Museum. So my theory is that these beings are in that position because, again, they died in that position. Why would they die in that position? Because, again, were these cutaneous breathers that once you administer a diatomaceous earth combined with toxic cadmium chloride, did that slowly put them to death?
See, they kind of withered up,
Yeah.
knotted themselves up into a fetal position.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting. You also see this position all the way across the world. I mean, this is something common that you would see. You were talking kind of like said exactly. But in Buddhist monks, monasteries, a lot of the preserved bodies that we see from going way back are also in that position. And I don't know if there's any
Yeah.
connection with that there, but
Well, I suggest that someone like Victoria might be seen in ancient Chinese script. So Victoria and these bodies may have been spirited across the world, which is why I suggest
possibly.
there's hyperdiffusion. There's one culture and it spread. It didn't react as fast as I wanted it to, right?
Is that little wider part right there? Is that one of the implants?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Wild, huh? They're perfect. They're like perfect little implants. Okay, I'm just trying to turn her a little bit. The other thing we can do is I think that could help is and this is, I like to talk about this anyway, so people know when they get into these things, is that you have your region of interest box. So you check your display, Roy, that comes up. And then what you do is you reduce everything you don't want to look at, right?
Does that give you better detail on the area that you're trying to look at?
Yeah, better detail. And ideally, too, it's easier to manipulate around
Right.
and we can just focus more so on her skull, right? And then you take take the box off. There we go. We can maybe take a better look at it. In fact, let's just let her spin a little bit and see what we see. A cursory glance looks, fairly human.
It
But look
really
at that
does.
skull. Look at
That's what I
how
was looking at.
elongated it is.
But I mean, even you see in the root structure of the teeth and everything, it's definitely more human slash primate than anything else. But you do also kind of see that beaking that you were talking about, where it kind of comes to a point, like everything kind of moves forward to that point down
Yeah,
by
that
the,
prognathic face. But that prognathic face could also be, part of that ape simian DNA as well.
yeah, seems to be more pronounced in certain ones.
Yeah, they're all different, but you can definitely see that even though they're different, there's plenty of similarities that show that these are clearly related. I'm reminded of the Dogon myth of the serpent mother, who the myth suggests that she breeds with her descendants and then breeds with her descendants' descendants. So a ancient crossbreeding. And then there's the Bon myth of the Himalayas, where an ogress mates with the monkey god, and that's how humanity is created. I mean, talk about just clear as day. That myth just tells you, that myth's telling you straight to your face what they believe happened. But yet we're gonna dismiss the beliefs of others as mythology, but our myths are religion that
Of
should be
course,
taken for word, right? And so
history
that's
is
kind of
written
where
by the
I'm
victor.
at this stage, where I'm just like, well, we need to start listening to these myths. And obviously, there's been some exaggerations, perhaps for storytelling, and the game of ancient phone
Sure, sure.
is taking place. But that doesn't mean you throw out the baby with the bathwater. There's still truth within.
I mean, they remained at least oral traditions for centuries for a reason. Now, do
Yeah,
they have canines? Because I'm not seeing they kind of all look like molars from this perspective.
that's a good point. That's a great point, and it's too bad too. I had a dentist kind of involved a little bit. I thought he was going to be involved more, but I don't know. I tried showing him what I believed were larvae that he said where it was natural nerve endings in the teeth. And I'm like, yeah, but this is found throughout the bodies, though, that same morphology. Yeah, that's a good point you bring up, though. Where are the clear canines? Let's go ahead and go to a soft tissue setting. And then the soft tissue setting, what you can do is you can still remove a layer with your Roy display, bring you in a bit past the surface area of the skull. And then you can also adjust the density.
It's insane
Let's
to me
see.
how far technology has come along in this area.
Well, I know. It's like, little did I know I was going to be involved in, I makes you like, well, maybe I should go to school for my doctorate. And at least then, if I had a doctorate, people would pretty much take what I was saying as that would be the appeal for authority. Right.
Exactly.
So I need to get a doctorate just so people can believe the theories I came up with when I had a bachelor's.
I think that's kind of how it works, man.
sort of seeing what we can see as we move in. So moving in, I can start to see, this is a soft tissue setting, that it looks like soft tissue begins to appear within the bone structure. Now, there's another setting you can go to. You can go to this advanced setting, and you can bring down the density of the bone a bit, and so it's less distracting.
When you look at just the outside photos of them, eyes look, very narrow and slanted. But when you look at it through this view, the orbital socket looks larger than Homo sapien.
Yeah. One of the fun things you can do also is you can now it's I don't know how accurate it is, to be honest, but there is a measuring tool in here. So I can
Get an
do
idea about the
something like that.
size.
Yeah. And that says it's 3 centimeters across, but I don't know how accurate it is, especially on the 3D.
Yeah.
But what I have done here, which is kind of cool, is that you can set, if you play with the setting enough, you start to get a sort of hyper realistic view of what's going on inside that eye socket. So, one researcher suggests that he can see her lens, and I suggest you might be able to see larval forms in her skull. And again, why are those implants in the it's so we can definitely question my hypothesis, but then again, there aren't any very good hypotheses as to what those implants are. So I suggest larval removal or larval management, and this may have been the impetus to that trepanation that we see through South America. Those random skull holes, right?
And so
You know
none
if
of
it
the implants seem to bind to bones anywhere. It doesn't seem to have a function medically
Alberto's hip
aside
seems
from
to
that
have a
one.
purpose.
Is
Yeah.
that just the hip socket to the femur there?
Yeah, maybe we should pull him up. But his 3D sometimes is hard to get working here.
I know we took a look at it a little bit earlier, but I really couldn't distinguish where the top of the femur was in comparison to the hip socket.
So I'm going to go ahead and close Montserrat, and we're going to see what we can get from Alberto. Although his 3D is sometimes difficult because you have to, the way they had set it up, you have to actually remove one of the files. But we can look at it in the regular flat, non 3 dimensional, and see what that gives us. So we're pulling up Alberto, who's sort of a holotype 1 or paratype 1, I should say. So he's sort of second to Josephina when it comes to kind of importance of specimens.
It's really interesting the variations between these, but so many similarities. I mean, it really does kind of feel like evolutionary steps in them.
Yeah, and again, we can at least look at pictures of. We'll go to the website to look at Suye since I don't have a scan of her, and see if that tells us anything. So yeah, I'm looking at him now, and it's like, is that for some reason his 3D is hard to pull up, so we'll just not look at the 3D today on Alberto. We'll just look at the regular scan here. Okay, we're gonna zoom in on the hip. Maybe we can look at that. Yeah, we can't, unfortunately. Gosh, I can't recall how to research his 3D. I had to ask someone last time. You have to remove one of his files for some reason.
What we're looking at there is the top of the femur fitting into that socket, correct?
Yeah, I did have another picture of somewhere. So where it's reflective is the implant.
Okay, I see that there. So it's almost like it's kind of, I guess, closing up and bonding together two parts of that hip socket, like the socket is likely what broke there.
I'm thinking, yeah. I'm not positive myself, but yeah.
That's what it kind of looks like. Like possibly there was a shatter there in the socket, the outside of the socket there, and that was kind of used to bind it together.
That's what I'm suggesting, yeah. Okay, so I guess that is the implant. We're looking at it from the opposite side. Yeah, it's hard to see. I would like to pull up his 3D, but I forget how to do that. Last time there was several files and you had to wait, volume information maybe. There were several files, and for whatever reason, the way they have it loaded is that there's too many, I guess there's conflicting files, so it's not allowing the 3D to come up.
Gotcha.
But I don't even see that file right now, so I'm not sure where that is. So anyway, yeah, you can
I
zoom
feel like
back
that
in on
kind
it.
of answered the question I had, though, because I definitely feel like that looks more integrated than any of the other implants that I've seen.
Yeah, I agree. And so we have to ask ourselves why, right?
Yeah.
Why are there so many implants on these? This is also where I suggest there is a possible larval form on top of it. Right here. You can almost see it right here. I showed you that one earlier.
It also kind of would lend, I guess, in my opinion, to them being more functional than ornamental, which kind of raises
Yes.
some even new questions about the one that was on Montserrat's forehead.
Right. Unless it's, trephination and they're removing larvae from her skull. So,
Is there a hole underneath that implant, or do we know? Can't tell.
boy, that's a good question. I think so. But now I'm going to want to look that up, right? But
I know
here I
there's some
suggest is a
cranial
possible, I
boring.
showed you this image before, this might be a larva engaged in eating right here. So what you can do, you can't see the bottom of the screen because I'm blocking it. Let's see. Can't see it still. So on my screen, you can run your mouse over, like for example, when I run my mouse over this metal, it has a Hausfeld units of intensity of going as high as 8,000. Okay. And just to give you an idea, when you look at the bone, the regular bone of the leg, that's 1600 to 1800. So that tells you a little bit about what you're looking at. So you can see if something is metal or not. And then when I go up to this, what I believe is a larval form, we're getting some negative here as though it's air. Actually, it's all coming up negative. Here's something a little bit structural. 99.
Huh.
So that's less dense.
Considerably less dense.
So it's just a little bit of science to help people differentiate between, okay, and what I'm thinking is possibly the rostrum is coming up 24 to 88. Actually, even higher. I guess depends on how you look at it. But if I were to put my mouse over the black spots, that's coming up in the negatives as though it's air.
Interesting.
So when people say, well, that's just bone, I'm like, well, maybe. But Alberto looks like plenty of brain matter also.
I was
You
wondering
pull
if
up,
that's what that is,
let me
or
pull
if
up
we
one of
have.
my infographics that I share a lot because it really has a significant amount of discoveries on it. So I like to share this one to the skeptics.
I'd be really interested in seeing like a sectioning of the brain just to see
Yeah,
what the
well, here's the
structure looks
back of the
like,
skull up here. I suggest that these creatures may have actually had two distinct brains because
rather
there's
than
very,
hemispheres. You think they were completely separate structures?
yeah, and I think that partially because of this very pronounced, robust separation down the middle. And these two chambers make two occipital bumps on the back of the skull as well. Now, if this was true, that would be another sort of invertebrate like trait. This is
And
not
is
a very
that
good,
bone in between there?
yeah.
Okay.
And, I have my proboscis theory too, where it suggests it mimics a hummingbird. So this may have also acted as a directionary canal for that proboscis. This also explains the fact that they have somewhat ridges on the top of their skull. So just one of the good graphics for people who suggest the little ones are fake. It's like, yeah, but they have beak-like structures, stomach ribs, possible two-chambered skull. There's
Now,
a
I think
lot.
you agree that some of the smaller ones, particularly the ones that got paraded in front of the Mexican Congress or whatever that was on the hearings, that those were fake, correct?
No,
Really?
no, those are just strange little of these little reptilians that just look odd. But if you look closely, they too have their furculas and their stomach ribs. Those two have disappeared. Those two, I think, were bought by a private collector. The ones that are fake, that are suggested to be fake, I even wonder about those, were the ones confiscated at the airport, and then the Ministry of Culture supposedly burnt them in an incinerator. So we'll never really know.
Sure, that seems perfectly normal.
Yeah, nothing suspicious there.
Yeah.
Oh, what else should we look at? Should we look at one of the children?
To be honest, Ed, I think we could probably do this for days.
I know.
And I
I'm with
still
you.
don't think we'd come close to covering half of it.
We didn't go over any of my cultural assertions.
Please, by all means, go ahead.
Okay, so maybe we'll leave the biology for now then? All right. So let's do that. I'm going to go ahead and pull up my slideshow, which, if people really wanted to see the slideshow, they could also simply go to probably, I have a couple of lectures out there if they really want a detailed version of the slideshow. I'm
And they
planning on
can
doing
probably
another
find some
lecture.
on tridactyls.com.
Yeah, I'm tridactyls.com or at tridactyls for most major social media.
Gotcha. I'll be sure to share all that information down in the description too.
Cool. So you probably want to do this full screen so we can just run through some of the stuff that we've already gone through. Trigger warning. Probably should have said that earlier.
Right. A little late on that
Just showing you some images from Nazca that appeared to show perhaps these beings and other tridactyl imagery.
And that one on the far left there, that's the one that's typically called the astronaut or
The
whatever.
astronaut. Look at that head, right? Isn't that great to finally, just corroborating evidence, right?
Interesting how closely that matches.
Mm-hmm. It's a tiny timeline. They were originally discovered as early as 2015 by Huaquero raiders, brought to adventurer Terry Jamin, and then 2 bodies were displayed in the Mexican Congress. The reason those look so fake is that they're dried, they've lost their water, and they're covered with that diatomaceous earth, and we've never seen them before. But those are the same as Josefina and Alberto that we just looked at today. Some of the artifacts that were found with the beings, this shape here looks very similar to some shapes on King Tut's dagger. This could be ancient writing that looks similar to either runes or Semitic writing.
It's interesting that you say Tut's dagger because that was made by either a meteorite or some sort of extraplanetary material.
Exactly. Now, this might also offer some steganography here, meaning that while you see a human face, you might be able to see a tridactyl face or two concealed within. We'll see later in other pieces. And it's
And what
something
was the
like this,
composition of those?
unknown. They were sold to
Okay.
collectors. They're not in possession. Actually, that plate might be in possession. I'm not sure.
That kind of just looks like a clay tablet almost.
This is Terry. He's sort of the lead researcher in Peru. So again, it's unfortunate people talk about Masson when maybe they should be discussing him. There's Masson, who's also a former journalist for 60 Minutes Mexico. And that's Joyce Mantilla, who's kind of leading the charge in Peru as far as journalism goes. Supposedly a cave of diatomaceous earth where some of the bodies were found. This is the Russian team, Kordakov and Galetsky. Those are the bodies in Mexico. Again, you can see the pronounced furcula and the gastrale rib cage. Here's some of the other researchers involved. So when people, again, focus on Masson, there are plenty of researchers involved. The biologist that's letting us know that Maria has chimpanzee DNA and bonobo DNA. Also, she has Myanmar and Han Dynasty DNA, which sort of alludes to some of that Naga and dragon myth I talk about. So when they said she had Myanmar DNA, I wasn't even surprised. Dr. McDowell won the award. He was nominated for the Gradwald Award, which is meaning for 2024, he was the leading forensic researcher in the U.S. who suggests these bodies are real specimens. I call him the Great White Hope because everybody was so skeptical of Latin American researchers. This guy's right out of central casting. Published peer-reviewed papers are limited. Even the ones that are said to be peer review are said to be through skeptical or predatory journals. So we're still waiting for the ultimate peer-reviewed paper. People can go to my site, tridactyls.com. You can read my biological and cultural assertions there. This is showing you the CT scans of various specimens. You can see that one of the big hands may go back as far as 7,000 years ago.
Now, I have seen photos of what you're referring to as the big hands. Can you give me like a size reference to how they are
I want to say they're
comparatively to the other specimen?
7 to 9 inches in length.
Okay.
So
So
again, I
that's
think
at
they're
least a little bit larger than what we're seeing with the main tridactyl bodies, correct?
yes. Here's a graphic from the alienproject.com demonstrating the various sizes.
Interesting.
So everyone should go to that site. This is called the family, 3 specimens together. These are the Zunigas that are key to the research in much of this. They're supposed to be on a Spaces this week on X.
Interesting. That thing that was going across on that previous file, is that like a sort of implant thing that's going across the chest? It has the two, seems to stand
Yes.
out so high in
So
contrast.
the egg bearers seem to have these chest implants. Now, these chest implants are right near the furcula, which is why I suggest they are there to assist in keeping the furcula stable for these four-limb first beings.
Interesting.
And again, you're not there's not a lot of good theories out there at all, hypotheses. So I'm trying to give people something, you know.
I understand. Yeah. Kind of
The re-
uncharted
it's
territory
uncharted
there.
territory, yeah. So I mean, I'm throwing some Hail Marys out there. I might be wrong on some eventually, but we'll see. You know, this image up here, Billy Carson just copied and pasted. He didn't even share. Thanks, buddy. Because that image is like, you know, that particular image. I don't know about this one. You know, I crafted that. So when you think about it, that particular image has never been seen before. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that's part of the fun of this. Okay, here's
Such
showing
an
you some of
interesting head shape.
the DNA, and this is the DNA of Victoria, and it's showing. Is this Victoria? No, this is Maria. So it's suggesting that she has about 33% primate and only a little bit unidentified on this one, it says.
Is that saying 30-something% Homo sapien? Is that what I'm seeing?
Mm-hmm. And then 3% pan troglodytes. Z.
And was there some DNA contamination with them?
So yeah, there is contamination, but from what I understand, that the contamination is the contamination is known and the unknown is known. So even though there is contamination, it doesn't necessarily, in other words, they're aware of the contamination and how much percentage that is. And from what I
So that's
understand,
taken into account in that chart there.
yeah. And
Okay.
we'll see another one of Maria. Let's go back and look at that just to make sure we cover that properly. I guess we just have to go back to the TV. Yeah, this one says, let's say, does this have contamination on here? I mean, really, it's just saying unidentified. Very small
Yeah.
unidentified amount on this one. Victoria, it's much more significant. So Wrangel, the biologist, is the one who put this together, demonstrating that a male from the Han people and a female from Myanmar are involved with this hybridization.
And it somehow ended up in Nazca.
Yeah. This image of Montserrat.
They're so similar, but there is a distinct difference between those and the Paracas skulls. And you hear so much about, it's just head binding and blah, blah, blah. But that creates a completely different looking skull when that's used. I mean, it's pretty easy to identify that. These or the Paracas ones don't really, maybe a few of the Paracas ones, but by and large, they don't seem to match up with that. But
Right.
these are very uniquely their own thing, it seems. Like I said, there's some similarities to the Paracas, but the actual extension, the way that it goes, rather than going up, it goes backwards and out more. Very similar to what you do see in some of the depictions of Tut and Akhenaten and stuff like that in Egypt.
Yeah. I mean, those elongated skulls they're found all over the world, and we do see head binding from cultures, don't we? Which
Which is obviously trying to mimic something that they saw.
Emulation, exactly. Right. And so why would that? So that's another example that something as specific as that, traditional academia is going to call that coincidence.
Yeah.
And that doesn't make sense. That's not how culture works. Why would anthropology be so focused on cultural diffusion, but when we get to something like that, they call it coincidence? Right. So this is Montserrat's child, Raphael. We were kind of looking at that today, weren't we?
Right.
and I have trouble locating that hand like they did.
Wild looking, isolated like that.
2 feet tall, these guys are.
Are these the same ones that were presented to Congress, or are these
No,
just
the
very
ones that are
similar
presented
species?
are similar. Yeah, that was Clara and Mauricio, which I think
Okay.
might be in private possession of Masson. I'm not sure, though.
So we don't have those similar scans of those?
Don't have scans of those.
Okay.
Just different views of Josephina's skull, the headless Victoria. I suggested that that skull is hers, and I think that might be true. I think there might be corroborating evidence of the DNA.
Were
Victoria
they found in the
suggests,
same location?
yeah, Victoria suggests might be depicted in the archaeological record.
Interesting.
So here's Victoria's DNA. 63.72% unknown, and only looking right about here, 3% Homo.
That's really wild. Do you know where from the body that
This
the
is,
specimen was taken?
let's see, Victoria, I want to say is hand and neck. So this is also Victoria. You can see there is slightly different numbers.
Yeah, which is also interesting.
A little more Homo sapien there. So, needless to say, the DNA, we're definitely not right. We're not putting a fork in that.
Yeah.
But that's
Yeah,
what's going to be
anyway.
great when we get the 6 other specimens. So everything's going to become so much clearer.
If you had unlimited amount of money and you could pull any kind of testing that you would want to do, what do you think would be the one test or study that could be conducted on these things that would definitively prove the case
Well,
for them being?
for me personally, I don't know if it involves cutting them open, but I think I can see larvae trying to escape the skin. So my goal would be any sort of microscopic camera or any sort of electronic scanning or a deeper scan that could definitively prove. I mean, that's like a personal thing for me.
Yeah, I understand.
It's like Don Quixote at this point. I need to see those larvae, and I think you can see them in the skin or even in the hands that are dissected and dried. So we talked about these other xenomorphs, I call them, the insectoids, with
Yeah,
their,
those things are wild looking.
I wouldn't doubt that if we do the DNA on this, which I'm assuming they are, that there's going to be, 0 to 1%,
What
human
is this?
DNA.
Is that like a protuberance coming off of the spine?
Yeah, there's like these spinal eminences, and they call them wings, and I don't think that's very accurate at all. They don't look like any sort of wing. I suggest, since they are pneumatic, that they may have assisted in
Like a
surface
swim
level
bladder.
predation,
Uh,
or just exterior lungs too. So if you were a cutaneous breather and you had these, they would help you float and help you breathe. That's the best I got. And if you look at some of the, the Spinosaurus, that's kind of famous for being in the Jurassic Park.
right.
That and other dinosaurs, they show as surface level predators. So it's not a bad theory of all, if I do say so myself. And again,
I think it's as good as anything else out there.
Well, that's what I was going to say. Like, we'll come at me with something. I'm like trying here. So if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. But at least I want to give people like a sort of a ground level to work from. And then maybe other people can, take it in a different direction and find the truth.
I think it's good because if nothing else, it's drumming up more interest that's needed to get to the bottom of what's going on with these things.
Right. Instead of just dismissing everything, it's all fake. One of like the talking heads from the YouTube channels said, if one finger is fake, then the whole thing is fake. I'm like, that's not how science works. Any more than if I brought one finger and said, hey, we got 20 aliens based on this finger. You know what I mean? So it's really weird, this like desire to dismiss. And again, is that like, ego or trying to like, you're not going to trick me. You're not going to fool me.
I think that kind of goes back to the same thing with the tendency for archaeology not to want to admit to anything that deviates from the current paradigm.
Yeah. And this is quite the deviation, isn't it? Look at that implant, by the way. Look at that strange implant this one has on its back end. That's something I don't even talk about too much.
It almost looks like something done to, like, you would see in a modern surgery to fuse the vertebrae, like from an injury.
Look at all those implants. Come on.
That is wild looking.
Yeah. Is it a fusion, or is it a garage door?
Could be.
Just
Do
want its
those things have teeth? Sorry, man.
No.
I keep getting distracted by little details in those because they're
No,
so
that's great.
strange
No, I
looking.
don't think. Oh, actually, wait. I don't know if I have it on this. I have done a close up on these, and they do appear to have like tiny lamprey like teeth. Yeah.
Interesting.
Different than the others, right?
Yeah.
It's so important. I mean, were all these bodies left for us for a reason? So we got a clear picture.
No telling that.
I
Yeah.
mean, I
Little
say
details like that, I think, make
if
a
you
lot
want a
of difference in
dragon, this
things like
might be
this.
it.
Right.
Oh, we're going the wrong way. It's one of these. I just wanted to sort of overwhelm the viewer with how many specimens are out there, and this isn't even all of them, right? Is Joyce even on there?
Let's see him.
There's Ferdinando. Look at all these different specimens. So when people just try to dismiss this, like, you have a lot of work. Even if you dismiss one finger, you've got a lot of fingers, buddy.
Yeah, for real. And Joyce is the only one that we found that has external genitalia that's evident, correct?
So that would have to be. So what's his percentage of human? 50% or more, right? 66 maybe? Who knows? This is another image I kind of cobbled together myself. Kind of cool. Just kind of putting things together so you can get a view of everybody. There's Joyce. I edited out his junk. That is so crazy. You said Akhenaten. That's exactly what I say. That's why sometimes too, I'm like, we probably could have even done a better job on the naming on some of these. Huh? Alberto, I would have named Vulcan, or I guess Hephaestus.
Right.
And even his ear implant looks like a pointy ear.
But man, I'm just looking at that skull on Joyce, and literally there is a sculpture of Akhenaten, and his face looks extremely similar to that.
That's probably him. That's where I'm at with this.
We can
say it sounds crazy, but I think that's where we're at with a lot of this stuff. This is the missing link to many different things. Santiago, kind of benign little gray, if you will.
And so you don't think that that's a child of the larger specimens? You think that that's maybe a separate type of thing?
No, I think it is probably a child. Yeah.
Okay.
But we don't know the percentage of, human DNA in all of these. They're so different, right?
Right.
Clearly, when you look at Akhenaten there.
I mean, you're seeing the much more enlarged cranium comparatively to the body structure.
Huge, right?
That's also a large cranial capacity.
Mm-hmm. And what do we know about that? That usually implies smarter, right?
Yeah.
Looks like we're getting into some of the smaller ones now.
That's what it looks like.
Some of my theories I've put together here. Deep time origins, if we're going by the unknown DNA of like Victoria, could be from hundreds and hundreds of millions of years ago. Tubular heart has been noted by other researchers. Hydrostatic strategy, so it suggested their neck extends. Eurostyle refers to that frog kind of morphology.
So there's a chance they do the ET thing then.
Right. Exactly, which kind of implies that Spielberg had inside information. The only thing I'm not too confident about right now is this axial conduct on follicular loculi, which we might see on the insectoids, meaning that they may have a reproductive system that runs along the length of their body.
Okay.
But that's more one of those kind of Hail Marys I don't have a lot of evidence for. I try to tell people like what I'm confident about and what I'm just kind of feeling out. I don't want to give everyone the illusion like, oh, I'm positive that it's this or that.
Sure.
I'm not positive on a lot of this stuff.
I saw her morphodidism on there.
Yeah. Which would also be a, now this is something I guessed based on the archaeological record. Some of the researchers have alluded to that because, Maria has come up, Mario as well.
Yeah.
So guess what that is though? That's another amphibian trait, my man.
True.
In fact, they can go through sequential hermaphroditism where they might even be able to switch back and forth.
Yeah.
Which reminds me of myths of whether it's Yahweh saying I was Shaddai before, or Loki and Set both getting pregnant.
I never really thought of that. Interesting though.
So just going over this, like how are they different? The small ones have a singular bone. They have a singular arm bone and a singular leg bone. Of course, the gastralia, the Eurostyle, spinal eminences on the little ones. I really, some of this I have to adjust.
That pyramid bone there, you're talking about
Yeah,
so
that might just end up being, that was something that Miles identified. I realized that was one of the things, like, this slide's kind of old.
gotcha.
That might just be those dense ear bones that
I
we.
was gonna ask if there was anything that we saw in their structure that would lend itself to vocalization or a particular speech that you would get more in like Homo sapien versus, say, a primate or another type of animal.
Yeah, those ear bones sort of imply that they might be relying on vibrations or vocalizations in water.
I guess it would make it less likely that they would actually have articulated speech functions.
They might make clicking noises.
Yeah,
Here, look, I'm still calling it the interclavicle rather than the furcula. So I mean, it's still, that's still debated. I guess I like the term furcula because it's a little more common, but some paleontologists say it's not. I've argued with anonymous paleontologists, but I've also read the report from the known paleontologists. Like, who are you going to believe?
right.
Cutaneous respiration. They bring up that the skull and the body are connected. Again, this might need to be adjusted. I'm realizing as I look at some of this.
Well, I mean, this is definitely a still evolving
It's
thing.
still evolving, and I tell people too, I don't mind putting something out there that I have to adjust later. So like I'm looking at this now, I'm like, oh, this slide show is already dated. I already have to update a bunch of this. So just keep that in mind, folks. Probable sequential hermaphroditism, definitely oviviparous reproduction, coelomic breeding, meaning that they're like the children are raised within the body. Possible parthenogenesis. I'm seeing that some of the juveniles may actually be born with eggs, which would be like an aphid trait. Forelimb first development, I'm seeing in the larva.
You don't see that in any other kind of like primate
Not
or
invertebrates, right? Yeah. Facultative quadrupedalism might be better termed facultative bipedalism. So they may have switched from forelimbs to rear limbs. And again, those forelimbs are longer. And according to my research, the forelimbs are developed first. Their limbs might have a hydrostatic mechanism too, just like that extending neck. So that might aid in ungulation moves.
so you think that was probably an evolutionary step going from the fore to bipedal like you see in other animals?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. Yes. So they would, or, again, they could just, part-time might be a better way to put it. Part-time bipedalism might be.
Okay. So
Ever
more,
since I was looking at the first bodies, they seem a little unnatural in that straight position. So I think they could do both. And if you know some of the theories of human bipedalism,
yeah.
the aquatic ape theory is that we came from the water and it came from standing up in water.
Yeah, I was going to say that it's kind of like following more closely in the primate thing. But I guess when you put it that way, it kind of is a meshing almost of the two things that we've been talking about between amphibian and primate.
Right. This just shows when like some of these morphologies appeared in history, how deep in time some of these things appear,
Yeah.
helping me to come to a conclusion. One of the data sets that these things come from deep time. This was a skull I found in Artemis that many people dismissed as pareidolia. So I purposely made this diagram to show that, like, if this is pareidolia, why can I recognize all of this morphology?
Interesting. And it does kind of look like you've got the ocular area there that stands out a little bit. Yeah.
This is one of the big hands on the right. Look at that implant. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Those are some
phalanges.
crazy long flanges comparatively to the back structure.
Kind of terrifying. And
Yeah.
also, is that 666?
Let's hope not. It kind of makes you wonder if they had claws at the end of that, if that was an offensive weapon.
Well, I wouldn't doubt it.
Hmm.
The big hand separate.
Yeah, they look considerably different than what you see on the full tridactyl bodies.
Feet of the smaller tridactyls, tridactyl skin. A
Yes,
lot of people
those
find
dermal ridges. That's what I wanted to get into with you. I totally forgot
good.
to
I'm
ask
glad
about it.
Yeah, we would have forgotten it. So yeah, one of the things they suggest from some researchers is that the perpendicular ridges are unique. I'm not fully convinced on that because even if you look at your own skin, we do have some whorls and we do have some points of perpendicularism. And also I see on possibility that they may have some curvature on these fingerprints as well. But you can also see scoots, and you can see what's interesting to my work in archaeology is this cross-hatching pattern on the skin here. Some close-ups. Here's a quote from someone who studied the skin. This is not normal skin as we know it. I'm not saying it's reptilian, but it's reptilian because that's scale-like as you would see on mummified reptiles.
Interesting. That's what we're looking at on the right side of the
And that's
frame here.
Dr. Sabine Kremer. I believe she's German. Just adding too that there's other researchers than just someone like Masson, you know?
Right, right. I think so much attention's put on him, like I said, just for the being able to debunk, have something to point at that gives a little bit
Yeah,
of a,
it's crazy.
yeah,
It's crazy. It's too much. And I try to call people out on that. I said, "You've lost credibility by talking about him," ironically. So yeah, there's the top of the furcula and the underside of the furcula. Here's the gastralia with the raptor gastralia as an example.
So is that cartilage in the middle of it? Because in some of the other images, it looked like it was just a fused single bone almost.
Yeah, it is these are fused. Victoria has perhaps some damage in the middle.
Yeah. I'm even talking like on the clavicle there. I noticed on this one,
She too may have had a fracture, and so that might be regrowth.
gotcha.
I mean, if they're really amphibians, they may go through regenerative processes as well.
True.
We talked about the Euro style. So this is just giving you a better view of what an actual frog Euro style would look like. On Louisa too, it seems to be smaller, as I guess could be expected.
So wild looking.
They may have a singular monocondyle that connects the skull to the vertebra to the neck, which would be similar to a snake.
Right.
And that's one of the
Okay.
smaller ones, of course. If you can't tell by the skull, it's like a suye or a nukari. Just some examples of some other elongated creatures that could be analogous to suye. The graphic showing a possibility of walking on all fours and noting the difference in the limb length.
They look a lot more creepy when they're like that.
Yeah, they do.
Like, oh,
I'm
is that a
also
thing of
reminded of
Rick?
like what did Tolkien know?
Right.
Tolkien seemed to know more than I think he was alluding to, huh? Some of the implants. We looked at this earlier, the metal composition of the implants.
Right.
Alberto's inner ear bone, which we have looked at the ear bones, but this one is on the exterior. So much so that you can actually see the inner workings of his ear bone, the various auditory canals.
Yeah. So how would that be put back onto his body?
I know. They would have to enter his skull, remove the ear bone from the interior of his skull,
Right.
and then place it in. Yeah. Yeah. Did he survive this?
I'm sure he wasn't happy if he did.
This is one of those graphic. Yeah, exactly. Who knows, man? This is one of these graphics where I'm not entirely positive of the labeling. I did my best to label what I thought it was on the ear bone, but it definitely
Gotcha.
requires an expert. So these are possible images of eggs within larvae, making me suggest, are these in fact born pregnant? Tridactyl heart is the tubular heart. It's going to be running between those vertebral plates and that column, the vertebral column. I also suggest that between the gastralia and the overlapping plates, is this some sort of proto-turtle? One of my favorite discoveries, also when people suggest to me, like, well, how do you know it's real? I'm like, well, they have a parietal pineal gland. So they have the parietal gland is on the surface to the rear, and the pineal gland is below the surface towards the front.
That would be a hell of a thing to try and fake.
Right. And like I said, I had this, it was a soft confirmation. It wasn't professionally confirmed, but it was confirmed by a professional. Let's put it that way.
Right.
And just another example. Also, too, I'm like, did this inspire any other cultural traits? It's very interesting looking.
Yeah, it is.
Tail of two brains, I suggest, because of those two cavities. We talked about that
Sure.
earlier. Appears to be a large fang on Louisa. which makes sense because researchers noted the space down below, and that space would make more sense if it was a recess for that fang to go into.
Yeah, I can see that. Is that at the front of the mouth there?
That's a peripheral view of the mouth. Oh, okay. My foot is cramping up for some reason.
Oh, no. No, we have been sitting here for a while.
This has to be updated also because I have the proboscis coming from the top down. So I've since made a new graphic. I believe instead the proboscis is running backwards through that space between the skull and then exiting a hole on the bottom. I'm pretty confident about that because of the hole and because of what I see in the larval forms. I'm seeing what looks like a reflective tube. Okay, this was me trying to put together what I thought was the reproductive system. I'm still, this is probably my weakest link. And I think part of the confusion is I'm seeing what I believe are larval forms in the central column. And I don't think the central column is playing a part in the reproduction anymore. I think it's actually maybe following along that tubular heart in between the column and the plate. So I've mentioned this a few times now. It's definitely one of my weaker theories. Maybe Suye, if I had scans of Suye, I might be able to figure out more. Here's the spinal column. So here's a nice artistic drawing. I had an artist come up with something for me. Possible exterior gills. And that's a close-up of the teeth you asked for, which are very similar to a lamprey. Now, these like teeth, this is like one of those examples of something you're not going to see from the typical researchers.
That is a creepy-looking little guy there.
This just talks about how the suite of morphological traits and the unknown DNA allude to origins of hundreds of millions of years ago. This was what I believe is the first larva I found. Can you hear it by any chance?
What's that?
Are you getting an audio?
I'm not getting any audio from that, no.
Okay.
I am seeing it, though. And that was located where at it in the specimen?
These are the eggs in Artemis.
Okay.
And I noticed that the eggs looked like they were fractured or compromised. And this is where I suggest that these pig dragons allude to the tridactyl larva.
It almost kind of looks like a pineal gland, too. One of them did. I don't know if you noticed that, but the kind of spiral, like Eye of Horus thing.
That looks like the larva from above. So I follow these eggs around, following that piece that's kind of sticking out there. Looking down, looking upwards at it.
Definitely something there.
The best image is probably this peripheral image at the end as we zoom in here. So I suggest that's a side view. The eye socket, its reflective hand there.
Are we able to determine through the scan what's bone and what's like tissue or?
Unfortunately, I don't have scans for Artemis. This was strictly using their video.
Gotcha.
At the alien site. But that was the beginning of the journey where I started to realize, okay, it looks like they have larvae in them. But again, other people will say it's pareidolia.
Yeah, you're going to have that.
Interior of the eggs, these black dots, I suggest, are like almost like if you were looking at shrimp in a scan. Those black dots are the voids of the eyes.
I see what you're saying now.
Needs to be confirmed, of course. Others possible larval forms. And I've probably add more. So yeah, I'm glad we went through this slideshow. I realize I have to update a lot. Possible serpentine form here. These are pretty good images. 2 different specimens within the bone. It looks like a couple of larval forms. You can kind of see
it definitely stands out there.
Which could be the, the eyes, the plate, the rostrum plate, beak, and then those overlapping spinal plates again.
Yeah.
Which we've looked at a few times.
That's definitely very distinct.
Yeah. And then if it was just one, larva, we could say it's a Bigfoot picture. But the thing is, I'm seeing it throughout different forms,
Yeah.
Some artistic renderings. The one on the left was made with AI. The one on the right was an artist.
Gotcha.
Close-up of what I believe is a larval face using its proboscis. In the mouth of Louisa, I believe I found these almost like tadpole-looking things with primitive arms.
Gotcha.
This is one of my favorites. I think this is one of the clearest. So I suggest here what looks like a tail is actually the fused feet, and then the actual tail is here, about to be resorbed into the body.
And that's what we see is that long pointed extension, right?
That long point of extension is after this disappears, but yeah.
Yeah. That's what that becomes.
That's what I suggest, yes.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's what I would think.
Some more, someone described this one looking like a tree frog.
A little bit, yeah. That one kind of does too.
Head here, exactly. So this one, it's kind of turning towards you. And again, you can still see possibly those vertebral plates again. See that zigzag it appears?
Yeah.
This one's interesting. For some reason, it comes up with color in the scans. It's like a green head. The eye is almost, but again, how much of this is true? Large head here, I suggest, and a smaller one next to it.
Does that color reappear in other areas in the scans?
No. In fact, the only way I saw it, it almost appeared like a blur. And it made me wonder too. That was one of the reasons I was like, wow, was this thing alive when they, when they scanned it? No, I don't see that color. It was very shocking to see a green blur go across the screen. This almost looks like a dog would be sitting down eating a bone, is what I suggest you're seeing.
Yeah, I can see that.
And the other behavior I've caught is like a head torquing behavior. So in this same image, I have another image where it appears to look like its head's torqued. This looks like, to me, I believe, a close-up of the face. You can see the teeth almost look like the teeth I showed you in Suye.
Yeah.
This one here might be the actual mouth open. I'm not sure. That's what I'm suggesting. When we looked at some of these earlier, what I believe are larval faces within possibility of a life cycle, of a metamorphic life cycle, if I'm capturing these, or I don't know how much of it's pareidolia. I don't know.
Yeah.
Okay. Wow. That was just, geez, we didn't even get to the cultural. So here's the cultural stuff. And again, I assert that I saw these in Bella Coola, Canada, in the Caribbean. This just goes over some of my research that we're going to look into. I say archaeology is predicting the biology of the tridactyls. Mythology is predicting the biology of the tridactyls because the mythology is predicated on the tridactyl biology. So here's some of my assertions. They're amphibians. They go through metamorphosis. They have forelimb first development. They have a penial third eye, cross-hatching on their skin, and larvae in the skull as predicted by artifacts. And here's some Caribbean and Canadian artifacts showing
I've seen some of those before. That's definitely very compelling.
Heart-shaped, tridactyl limbs, mother goddess imagery. Some geometric signs found in cave paintings seem to allude to the tridactyls. And not only that, but they seem to be coming from the bay and radiating outwards. A Frenchman has put together these wonderful images of what appears to be cordiform faces and tridactyl imagery all around the world. Again, to overwhelm the viewer. They did a great job. Oh, I've been looking for this one. I didn't know it was here. That's a wild one right there, boy.
Yeah, that's pretty crazy.
This guy did a great job. In fact, I'm supposed to interview him somehow. I don't know if we're going to do it like English to French or how we're going to do it. This is one of the reasons why I suggest the nubs are actually just therianthropic faces themselves. Just adornos. They don't have any structural purpose. They're sort of random. But again, it's showing you that these shapes are all over the world, right?
Yeah, shape.
This, I suggest, is one giant head.
I see what you're saying.
And perhaps with a life from the mouth or man from the mouth of the serpent motif in the center. Oceania, heart-shaped faces. Also, Oceania on the front of their boats said to represent the ancestors who guided them across the ocean. In the Americas, might even have an implant there. Paracas fabric seems to have hyper-realistic versions of the beings. Ceramics, Nazca ceramics, Paracas fabrics. And we talked about this earlier, that to the Maori, they were ancestral beings. Taino, they were the mother goddess. To Easter Island, they were creator beings. To Syria, fertility beings. Three of my favorites.
So these pop up all the way back in Mesopotamia. This is interesting.
Eurasian artifacts, I talked about these. Kind of benign little family figures. Seem to be almost caught in a candid moment.
Yeah.
Some of the artifacts that I thought allude to the metamorphosis, the Magatama, the pig dragon, and even images of Ganesh, the elephant god. And then these are Naga beings, which are said to be snakes, but I don't know a lot of snakes that have noses,
True.
This is the famous genetic disc, which people thought was fake forever. But now it appears to have like tridactyl-like imagery on it. So now I'm suggesting that this genetic disc is likely the real deal. And there's one of the larvae I
Interesting.
found, and then there's one of the depictions on the disc.
Yeah, it definitely looks similar.
I also found a lake recently that are said to be two ancestral tadpole people that spawned humanity came from that looks that same shape. I'm thinking, I thought of a good name. They call them Nazca Tridactyls. Might be a good name for them. So I have these other theories. How about this for an interesting icon? That the symbol for God, heaven, sky, Tian, looks like strange little beings.
Yeah, it does.
I also believe that our ancestors may have hidden knowledge of them. And I trace this morpheme, I call it the Naga morpheme, the sound, found in Naga and other words like Anguilla, meaning eels, Angle, and angels. So while you may see a ram here, I suggest that could be a steganographic concealment of the tridactyl beings as a ram, and the ears has the cross-hatching pattern, the ears, which I suggest could be the eyes, have the cross-hatching pattern of the skin. And here's that close-up of that taino, one of my favorites, one of the ones that I remember appears to have a child in the center of it, which would kind of resemble these positions here, which seems as though these ram gods are protecting the human, right?
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
Here's one of my favorite steganographies. If you're having trouble seeing it, squint your eyes a little bit and then open them a little. So this is the tree of life. This I saw in a Praveen Mohan video. It shows a little dwarf-like being, but then between its arms, it appears to have a tridactyl head and other images that appear to show tridactyl faces within the arms. I suggest that something even as modern as our ionic columns may just be a evolution of the Syrian eye idol. And those columns are found at mother goddess temples that are many times built over water. And we even call these eggs within and these eyes. A very dramatic form of steganography. I suggest that the two faces at the Temple of Dendera actually form one tridactyl head.
Yeah.
Even the cornucopia, if we look back far enough, the cornucopia ends up taking on the shape of a serpentine being, going as far as to like literally being a serpentine being in this particular statue. And this clued me in is when I saw the statues were holding these things like they were living things, not objects.
True.
Now, why would that be? There's a she-goat that is said to have taught Zeus. So it is supposedly the horn of the she-goat. Some just another re-images of these. This famous temple, everyone sees the two faces on the side of the Bayon temple. But I'm suggesting once again, the whole thing creates one large face.
I see what you're saying.
Mouth, born of the mouth motif. This one's very distinct, appears to have a very tridactyl-like head coming from its mouth. Paracas culture, life from the mouth. This one's also very, very tridactyl-like, that head.
It's interesting that there is tie-ins there with the Paracas region.
Mm-hmm. Here's several holding up the heads. I don't know if it's because the skulls were heavy or just, this one's a very cute little guy too. Look at that little thing. Some of them are very endearing looking, you know. So Victoria, I suggest, is Victoria the seated god shown throughout history?
Interesting.
Another close-up of the fingerprints, but then this is the wall of Longu Cave.
Yeah, I was going to say that cross-hatching pattern as well seems to repeat. You see that a lot in various places around the world, and it's something that nobody can really seem to explain.
I suggest there might actually be ceramics out there because even here in Florida, we suggest that a fabric was used to press into the clay to make the cross-hatching pattern. So is it possible that there's clay in Southeast America that actually was made, the impressions were made with actual tridactyl skin? Because on the left is tridactyl skin and on the right is clay. And my God, do they not look so similar?
Certainly do.
Going over some of the symbols throughout the world, showing serpentine beings, tridactyl-like limbs, heart-shaped faces, other symbols that very well could be of origin from the tridactyls. This here Buddha symbol, the paisley. You know, one of the first places that humans supposedly migrated to, now I'm kind of looking at it in a different light now, is Tibet. Why would humans be a straight path to Tibet unless we're looking at it all wrong? And again, this is one of these graphics I'm going to have to change. What if it's not out of Africa? What some researchers are suggesting, it's out of Asia.
Certainly a lot closer. And it's also a region where you see those mummified bodies in that same seated position.
And it's also where Denisovans are coming from, Neanderthals are coming from Eurasia. And also, even in the modern times, think of how much culture comes from there. Gunpowder, printing press, paper, compasses. It's almost like it's a continuous cultural exchange stemming from this region. Here's me tracing the morpheme Ka and these three-fingered hand symbols. Here's me tracing that Naga morpheme, that sound throughout the world. Many times it relates to fertility, water, serpents.
Makes sense.
I'm suggesting that Mega Lake Gobi may be the origins of our flood myths, of our Tower of Babel. If you trace back these languages, you could trace back these languages to a central location to this same region of the world. I know we talk about the Levant region, and we talk about bread cultivation, but what about yams? Why are yams found all across this belt here? What a great thing to plant for your hybrids to come across. This is another one of those fun little just discoveries through all of this, is that the Sphinx and Lion's Rock both line up on one of the holiest mountains, if not the holiest mountain on the planet, by a degree. That's pretty amazing.
You see that a lot of like megalithic sites and very prominent constructions from ancient history where they seem to line up across meridians.
It looks like Lion's Rock may have tridactyl limbs at the base of it.
Sure does.
So another interesting discovery was what I call the rediscovery of a forgotten god, Ka. I see Ka in the morphemes as well, in the phonemes and the sounds. And I wasn't sure if I was right in the thinking that Ka was a god until I came across a Naga tome called the Nilamata Purana, where it says right in there, Ka is the creator. And when I found that, I was like, eureka. And if you combine the sound Ka with the sound, you get things like Kang or King on. Here's some Naga people who appear to be tattooing furculas, cross-hashing skin, orbital arches, temporal bones, and then even practicing neck extending to resemble the dragon mother. And that's in Asia, not Africa, you know?
Yeah. And that's really interesting that we were talking about how we thought they might have that with their necks being able to extend like that. So I didn't even think about how people have mimicked that neck extension.
Mm-hmm. Why? It's almost like we're having an answer for everything with these. And just some artistic depictions of various forms. And just, again, some more images suggesting we were never alone. And what's my conclusions here? Let's see what this says. The Tridactyls of Nazca, Peru represent primate, proto-amphibian hybrid beings that corroborate with post-flood cosmological narratives of ancestral tutelary beings that taught man culture and civilization, best exemplified by the Naga and dragons of Asian belief systems. So continue the virtual dig, because I believe that there are still myths to be investigated and artifacts to be looked into. And then recently, we have a wonderful shot of Eric Burleson's face as he looks at one of the large hands. And then me, the museum I used to work with, and me and the paleontologist, Bobby De Palma. And then these are some of the sites you can go to. I'm tridactyls.com, the Alien Project, tridactyls.org. Right. And those giant graphics from the Frenchmen can be found at this site here of little beings and ant people.
Interesting.
And that was it. We kind of did a quick run through, but again, I'm glad I did, because I realize I have to do some more updates. But that's the beauty of today's modern technology, is that you can keep updating your graphics, and just keep adding to it. Sure. I can keep making it longer and more detailed. So thank you for listening to that. And I don't always get a chance to go through the cultural stuff, so I wanted to show the cultural stuff.
I appreciate you sharing it with us, man. It's definitely, It's a good thing that you can update it because it does seem like it's a continually evolving story that we're kind of just rediscovering.
Just taking piece by piece here, you know? Like, look at this guy. You can't even see because here I'll have to. We made this recently for fun.
It's
Oops.
crazy looking. It looks blacker than black.
Yeah, because it's on the green screen.
Gotcha.
So my friend 3D printed this up for me to make a four-limb first kind of. So
really cool, man.
yeah, I mean, if you ever want to do it again, or if you want any more details, you know, we can work on some more details and specifics, you know.
For sure, man. Yeah, as this story develops, I would love to revisit it with you at some point because it's just one of those topics where, like I said, to begin with, I think we could go for 10 hours and probably not be able to cover everything and every
Probably not.
angle
I
of it.
know, and I can definitely go into more detail, and we can definitely. There's probably like 100 more slides I've made. I call them info memes.
Right, right. Well, it's a good way to convey a lot of information, kind of condensed and make it a little more
Condensed and
digestible
just a
for
little
people.
educational kind of blip for people.
Right. I think a lot of people are visual learners too. And I think that's another
Right.
reason I wanted to start doing these kind of interviews on camera, which we haven't done in previous seasons. But I
Oh,
think for a lot
okay.
of people, it kind of helps people pay attention a little more and really pick up what's being discussed.
Yeah, yeah. Because I know it was called radio, so I wasn't sure if like we were going to be audio or not. Now,
Yeah, no. That's just kind of a throwback thing for the name there. But
absolutely. Yeah, I get it.
man, I really do appreciate you coming on today, Ed.
Thank
It's
you,
been a
Josh. I
fascinating
appreciate
journey
listening.
through this. Yeah, man, my
Hopefully
pleasure.
it sends you
This is
off on
some
some direction too, you know?
For sure. Yeah. I definitely will continue to dig through this kind of stuff and keep up with what's going on. I try to do that with a lot of the stories that we cover because I like to bring information back to the audience and follow up on things that we've talked about before as developments tend to change. And
Yeah.
this is definitely something that's continuing to evolve and
Continuing to
change. So,
evolve. So we saw some of that today. It's like as I look at my own stuff, I'm like, oh, I need to update that. Oh, I should probably change that. So
right. Yeah. And that's just kind of a microcosm of the whole thing. So, I mean, there's definitely a lot of stuff that to come back and revisit and touch on. So, yeah, man, I would love to get you back on, Ed. I had a fantastic time talking with you today, by the way. Aside from the information, it was a pleasurable discussion, and I appreciate you having it with me.
awesome. Thank you. Thanks for having me, man. It was fun. Hope we do
Is
it
there any
again.
other links that you want to share besides
No, I
tridactyls.com
mean,
before
just
we get off there?
tridactyls.com and at tridactyls for Facebook, X,
Sure.
TikTok, and YouTube are pretty much
Gotcha.
my biggest social media there.
Sure.
I try to
Okay.
get
Well,
at on Instagram, but some kid has a Yoda fan club there.
yeah, you'll have that. Awesome, man. Yeah, well, I'll be sure to put all the links, like I said, down in the description for anybody who wants to check this out, dig a little deeper into it. Fascinating stuff, Ed.
Awesome.
Thank you again so much for coming on, brother. And we'll revisit this at some point for sure.
Very good. I can't wait. Live long and
Awesome, man.
prosper.
You too, brother. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.